Just natural.
Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Milwaukee Planning Commission. Agendas and additional copies of staff reports are available on the table in the hall. If you've not picked up an agenda, please do so. It contains important information about the process. If you wish to be included in the mailing list for a decision, please add your name and contact information to the sign-up list located on the table in the hallway. If you wish to testify, also please fill out a yellow comment card. I did want to make a note about the meeting this evening regarding the work session item for the Hillside Master Plan. The report this evening and next week at Council's work session is informational only. No application has been filed by the county, and no record has been opened. Concerned citizens are invited to make public comment during the public comment period. However, as the chair, I have the discretion to curtail repetitive public comment, and comments shall be limited to 3 minutes per person. Comments made during the public comment period will not be tied to any future application, and concerned citizens are responsible for making sure their comments are given at the appropriate stage in the land use review process. At this time, we do not know when that will be. Citizens can also contact the county at any time to voice their concerns. Again, there is no application before us tonight. This is not a public hearing. No decision is being made this evening. The Commission will not be deliberating or providing comments on the presentation. This item is solely for informational purposes. This is an opportunity to learn about the project and to hear from the county in a project update. So I encourage you all to stay and listen to the presentation so that you have the most accurate and current information about the proposal. The master plan concepts we see tonight may not be the plans that ultimately come before us when an application is filed, which is why any testimony at an informational presentation is premature. Regarding the flyer that was distributed over the weekend, it misrepresents the status of the project and overall review process. I'm sorry you were misled, but tonight is only an opportunity for the county to provide a presentation outlining a project update. Again, it is an informational presentation for all of us, not a public hearing. The land use review process for the Hillside Master Plan will be an extensive process with ample opportunity for public comment and review. This is not your only opportunity. A general description of the land use process will be provided during the work session. We want to make sure that anyone who is interested has signed in with all your contact information so you'll be notified when the land use application is submitted. Next on the agenda is approval from the minutes of last meeting, but we approved those, so we have no new minutes. Moving on, informational items. Are there informational items from staff? No? Okay. No? Okay. All right. So moving on to audience participation. So this is an opportunity to comment on items that are not part of the hearing process. We do have a hearing after the work session, so those who wish to testify on the hearing are welcome to do so at that time. But we will take public comments and limit those to 3 minutes. I may have to shift if we're hearing a lot of repetitive information, but I do have several people that signed up to make comments, and I'll call your name. If you decide not to make comments, you can just signal by saying no thank you, and we'll move on to the next person. Commissioner Hemer will be keeping track of time for us during this portion of the agenda. Okay, so we'll go ahead. Beatrice McLeod? Yeah. You have to come up and state your name and address. Sorry, for those who wish to testify, please come to the table, and then you can sit and state your name and address for the record and make your comments. So
Sit?
Yeah, you can.
Okay.
Yeah, welcome on up.
Saying very well. Here we go. Okay. So I'm Beatrice McLeod, and I live at 2840 Southeast Olson Street. So I'm right on 29th Avenue. And what else do I need to tell you?
That's it. Okay. Name and address for the record.
So I'm not as well versed in this as I want to be, so I'm glad that I'm starting in this adventure. But my concern is if the road were opened up to go down 29th Street so that the community can exit through 29th, because my concern is that there's a lot of bikes, a lot of kids, a lot of people that use that. Somebody was using the term greenway. I don't know if it's a greenway, but it's just a busy street, and I know that some people, it's so straight, and there's no stop signs except down by Roswell. So my concern is just, actually a lot of people do use it to avoid 32nd. So it's for safety. That's my major concern, is for safety in that area, you know. I don't know, I like the development the way it is because I enjoy the space that's there. I'm concerned with 550 apartments or whatever are going to be there, but I do support that it's nice to update that area and to work with people that want to, you know, that are living there. But my concern is really the egress from there, or however that goes.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Clifton Koski.
Clifton Koski, 2903 Southeast Van Waters. So I'm also right on 29th, and I'm fully in support of us working towards helping reduce the overall cost of living in the Milwaukee area, and so helping lower income families is, I'm definitely in support of that. And I agree that, you know, there maybe needs to be some concerns about extra stop signs or speed bumps on 29th, but overall I'm very much in support of the project.
Thank you. Okay. Ruel Coburn.
My name's Renelle Coburn. I live at 9114 Southeast 29th, and I'm the one who put the flyer out. Sincere apologies. I just found out about 10 days ago. Sounds like I might have misused some language, and I did not intend to mislead anybody at all on anything. I'm just, trying to get up to speed because I've had no idea what's going on, and there's a lot to dig into. And I found that most of my neighbors had no idea what was going on. And I'm right on 29th as well, and my number one concern is vehicular traffic coming through. Bikes and peds, fantastic. Keep it open. Develop the greenways that pass through, going through Monroe with all the projects. I think something great can really be done here, and that Milwaukee as a city could actually shine as a model for urban infill development and the integration of transit and pedestrian and bicycle friendly spaces for all of us. I'm not against the development at all. I'm all for affordable housing. Different neighbors that I spoke to over about the last week have concerns about site contamination. Again, because I haven't heard a presentation yet, I feel like cart's a little before the horse here, and I haven't been able to dig in on the copious amounts of material. So I'm hoping we'll hear something about site contamination and safety and tests and reports. Transportation's the big one again. That's what I wrote the most about, and I won't subject you to all of it, because one of the biggest arguments for density is that it makes public transit and alternative forms of transportation viable. So opening up 29th to vehicular traffic seems to be a direct contradiction to that principle. I used to work in land use, transportation, and energy issues for a foundation in San Francisco, so done a lot of work in this area. And you give people surveys. You say, are you in support of public transit? They say yes, and later in the survey you ask, will you use it? And they say no. In other words, get the hell off the road so I can drive. So humans are a bit of a stubborn breed in terms of changing things, and I really want us to be a great transit-friendly, bike-friendly, pedestrian-friendly community, and 29th and our particular neighborhoods, like our Village Green. Literally, I went out to walk the dog on Sunday morning, and there were about 20 different people just walking up the street with kids, no care or concern for cars. It's unique. There's not much of this left anywhere. You know, kids have to worry about cars. You just have to be worried about cars. I really would hate to see cars dominate our lovely neighborhood. There also are concerns about, and again, I hope we'll hear about this budget for the increase in public services, fire, police, schools. Where's that budget coming from? I don't know.
10 seconds left. So.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
And those are the main things.
Thank you.
Boom. Thank you so much. And again, apologies, had no intention of misleading anybody at all.
Okay.
Lisa and Matt Renker.
Hello, Matt Rinker, 3012 Southeast Balfour Street.
And my name is Lisa Gunyon-Rinker. I live at also 3012 Southeast Balfour Street. I am the land use chair for the Ardenwald Johnson Creek Neighborhood Association and have been working through this process with the county for, well, since 2018. So there's been a lot of review and a lot of discussion. And a main focus we had as a neighborhood was to make sure it was a transparent process. And I felt that everything was transparent until our May open house. All the discussions that we had had with the county surrounded having 300 new units built, plus the 100 that were already remaining would also be rebuilt, so 400 new on Hillside Park. Now, at the open house in May, I found out that, it's now 500, so all the designs we saw had 500 units, and now we hear it's more like 550. So that means 650 if you include Hillside Manor. And so I just feel like the transparency in this process for the neighborhood hasn't been good. I feel like we should have, there is a thing called compromise. And where I come from, where I grew up, you have to have the facts and the information. If you don't have that, you're not at the table. And so I don't feel like our neighborhood was fully at the table during these discussions. Plus, I couldn't make any of the stakeholder meetings because they were all scheduled at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And I work down near Salem. So I'm a little frustrated, and I feel things were a bit disingenuous in this aspect. And I also, if 29th, that was a concern of mine before. As you remember, I've come before about 29th being opened. And it's our neighborhood greenway as part of the transportation system plan, and I would hate to see that ruined with more vehicular traffic. And my request to council was, if that was going to happen, it was going to open, that we at least have some kind of traffic calming devices in place before. And that's the concern, is traffic is going to increase. We know that. Density is going to increase. We know that. As a neighborhood, we have been on board and willing to accept, I'd say, a pretty large amount, considering our comp plan says we're not supposed to have this much growth before 2035. And we're going to have it, within the next 5 years. So I just would like the neighborhood to have a little bit more say as far as being heard and understood and part of the process today. And neighbors that didn't know about it, you do have time to comment. This, again, it isn't a done deal, but your comments are important, and these are also, Planning Commission are your colleagues in the sense that they also live in this community and serve this community. So thank them for what they're doing. Anything to add?
No, I'm just here as the chair of the Ardenwald Johnson Creek Neighborhood District Association in support of the comments of our land use chair.
Thank you both. Eugene Trapp.
Hi, I'm Eugene Trapp. I live at 9819 Southeast 36th Avenue, Milwaukee, Oregon, 97222. And the wife and I, we walk usually every day, 3.5 to 5 miles a day in different locations in the Ardenwald district and different areas around Milwaukee. And talking to people about the cottage on they're talking about building a cottage on Harvey Street, about 37th and Harvey, or 38th, somewhere in that area. Nobody knows about it. And what people I've talked to, they said, what the hell's going on? I've never heard about it, and we don't need those people there. Why don't they find some place to put those people where they're wanted? We don't want them here. And I've talked to, I'd probably say, realistically, probably at least 50 to 75 people. And I'm not out there getting names and everything. I'm just talking about, I'm walking. We walk every day, and we talk people. I've been walking for years, and people see us, hi, how are you? And yet they don't know what's going on. And I didn't know about this quote, cottage thing until about a week and a half to 2 weeks ago. and I didn't know anything about it. And I read the pilot, I read all the papers here, the Clackamas Review and that, and I've never heard of it. So what I'm saying is, I think I'd like to know more what's going on. Of course, I haven't been to a lot of meetings here either, because I've got a lot of things going on. I'm retired, but I've got a bunch of grandkids that I look after and take care of with my rest of my family. But, you know, this cottages isn't the thing we need on Harvey. That's what I'm saying. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Elvis Clark.
Well, Commissioners, I live in Ardenwell and Sherry Lane, 3536. And I think I support the 29th concerns, the concerns about the 29th Street going from low traffic flow on vehicles to higher traffic flow. And it's a greenway. But also I want to point out that even before the Hillside was starting to gel more here, there was a study supposedly done that in the 5 years, the Harrison and 224 area is going to be difficult to manage the increased traffic flow. And so there's an overall concern that I have, because it's very important to maintain not only bicycle and public transit, but also automobile mobility. And so I think the number of people, you've added units since the start of this, from 300 new to over 400. And so I'm concerned about the traffic congestion failing. We have failures on that major corridor to get to across town to jobs. If you maintain automobile mobility, you help the low-income people because you expand the geographic area they can access for jobs. And so it's not, you can't just zero in on bikes and public transit. Public transit has its functions, but it only covers like 8% of all commuters. So I think you need to reduce the number of units you're planning there, possibly, or we need to have a bigger discussion how we handle this increased units there at Hillside Manor, plus the one at Monroe Apartment Complex. So that's all I got. Oh, plus maybe some of the confusion about where we are is that in the e-packet here, you look at the master plan and it says gather input, refine output, and it shows us along that curve almost done. So, I mean, might be a bit of confusion about where we are in the process because of that graph there. Anyways, thank you.
Thank you. Steve Lee.
Hi, my name's Steve Lee, 9876 Southeast 36, same area as these people. I was born and raised here, lived here my whole life. You'd never seen me before because I never really had a reason to come. You guys did that good a job. But my concerns are the same as everybody else's, traffic, but there are also concerns that go a little bit deeper. One is the interfriction of the city. Okay, our sewer system is failing us. Okay, now we want to add more houses. We've added more houses to Lake Road at Cheragino Farms. People have lived here a long time, know who Eddie is and all that, and Joe. And our roads, my road in front of my house hasn't been repaved since 1956 when the project first was introduced. So I see us moving on with, and I'm for low-income housing, but maybe not quite to the extent of moving 550 units into it. I think that a certain amount of that land should be used for people that aren't so misfortunate, okay? Because then you move people into the community that can support themselves and add to the community and pay their taxes. Okay, this to me is also important, that you have I'm not saying it's bad people or anything, but when you have low-income sections, there also seems to be a lot of problems that come with that. So my philosophy is if you mix some good in with not so good, then it evens out a little bit. So, but like road safeties, traffic, and the type of people that we bring into the city is important to me. I want, all the bond measures and stuff. I voted for it to improve the high school. I see our graduation rate coming up. I see our families doing better all around. I coached basketball for years and years in this city. So I like to see the trend go to where our youth sees a positive influence too, and that something good comes from this, and not heavy traffic. And man, I don't like living in the city, because it is a good city to live in, and there's 4 generations of my family in this city, so I'd hate to see it go in a wrong direction here. So I'm hoping that you people make good, wise decisions and consider the people that have lived here for a long, long time, because it is a very special place to us. That's all I got to say.
Thank you. Florissa Trapp?
My name is Florissa Trapp, and I live at 1998 Southeast 36th Avenue, along with some other people here. And I'm probably I hope I'm not repeating myself too much, but I am concerned about the growth. On Olsen in particular, I think I can count a great percentage of those people that actually, in the last 4 years, moved out of Portland. I just don't want to see us we're Milwaukee, but we're sort of annexed by Portland. I don't like the growth. I know we have to, but I just see more problems with traffic, more problems with safety, more crime. I mean, I had to go to Seattle in 1998 for work, came back, and was astonished by the amount of crime in Portland, and I just don't want to see us become a little Portland with too many people in such a residential area. I'm not sure how to grow without having problems, so I hopefully y'all take that into account and do keep us informed.
Thank you. Eric Fusgard.
I was here recently, my first time. Yeah, Eric Fosgard, 2758 Southeast Olsen, Milwaukee, of course. So I walk along 29th, so I am using it. That's my primary concern, is vehicular traffic. It used to be with ODOT, and so I know the concerns for trying to develop bikeways and walkways, and this is one of them. This is a transit access, so I'd like to preserve that. I don't know that speed bumps will cut it. I just think that we ought to just restrict vehicle traffic coming from this development, and people have other access. I'm also a landlord, and I know that there is a need for housing. Rents are going up. I think people are finding Selwood a little bit too expensive, and then Milwaukee's becoming very attractive. So those are my comments. I am not sure also where we are in the scheme of things. I hope we hear more about that. I don't know, how much more time we have to speak our mind about this.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you to everyone for being expeditious in your comments. We heard you, appreciate you sharing that information with us tonight. I will reiterate for those who maybe just came in, this is not a hearing tonight. This is an informational session. The land use process has not started yet for this project. So with that in mind, we are here to learn about the project, where they're at in the process. We're going to get all of the updates on that. And those of you who have signed up, you'll be sure to get notice when the land use application is filed. So I would encourage you to please sign up, and that way you can stay in tune with the timing of the land use application. So with that, I believe we're going to move on to the informational work session. So please come on up.
Good evening, Planning Commission. I'm Erin, Housing and Economic Development Coordinator. Before we bring the county up, we're going to have Associate Planner Vera Colas talk a little bit about the plan development process that the Hillside Manor will go through when they submit their land use application.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you. I just wanted to spend a minute because I know that there were some concerns about where we are in this process. And again, we don't have a land use application, but the Hillside master plan process will go through a planned development process. And what that means is frankly numerous public hearings, both with the Planning Commission and with the City Council. If the master plan itself will go through the plan development review process. If a zone change is required as part of that process, that will be a concurrent application as well. Transportation impacts would be covered as part of that those land use applications, particularly with the zone change piece. Design of the overall project, density, the road network, open space, mix of uses, all of those kinds of details are covered as part of that planned development review process. Again, the plan development process requires public hearings with the Planning Commission, recommendations going to City Council, public hearings with the City Council, who ultimately is the body that would approve the project. So I hope that clarifies things for folks in the audience that this is an informational meeting, but the public hearings will be numerous, will be notified, and there will be ample opportunity for public comment and questions as part of that public hearing process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so now I'd like to introduce the Hillside project team from Clackamas County. So again, they're here tonight to present an update on the 18-month process that they've gone through to date to kind of develop their proposed master plan. We have Stephen McMurtry, Director of Housing Development, and Lisa McLennan from Scott Edwards Architecture, who are going to do the presentation. But we also have Jill Smith in the audience from Clackamas County as well. So I'll bring them up. If you guys have any questions that I can answer, I'm happy to pop back up and answer them.
Thank you.
There you go.
Sorry.
Can I ask a question? Is it permissible to sit on the floor over there?
Yes.
It's Control L.
All right. Ready? Good evening. My name is Stephen McMurtry. I'm the Director of Housing Development for the Housing Authority of Clackamas County. With me is Jill Smith. Also, she is the Executive Director of the Housing Authority of Clackamas County. And to my left here is Lisa McClellan with Scott Edwards Architects, and we'll be just giving you an update tonight on the process for the Hillside Master Plan. Kicking this off, the Hillside Master Plan began in July, about a year ago, of 2018. Currently, we have a 16-acre site with 200 public housing units, affordable housing units that are on that site. 100 of those are in a tower that many, I'm sure, are very well aware of here in Milwaukee, and then 100 units that make up the park, which is what we're talking about this evening. There are a variety of financing mechanisms that we're contemplating for the redevelopment of this site. One of those is the HUD Rental Assistance Demonstration Project, or RAD, as well as HUD Section 18 Demolition and Disposition. I bring that up because those are the mechanisms, along with our land use process that we'll be embarking on with all of you and the community here, that are necessary steps for us to move forward with the redevelopment. We were awarded a Metro 2040 Planning and Development grant to help us with the master planning process, and have been working with a variety of consultants, obviously with Scott Edwards Architecture, and their tutelage and leadership through all of this, and it's been an exciting project. The Hillside Master Plan sets the vision for a vibrant, mixed-use, mixed-income community that preserves and rebuilds existing affordable housing units at the 16-acre site while creating new opportunities for expanding housing options and type. It is a very bold vision that's looking at a new way to create a mixed income and mixed opportunity neighborhood here in Milwaukee. We're very excited about it. Project goals, some quick highlights: up to 400 new affordable housing units, community gathering space that'll be shown in the slides as we move forward, enhanced outdoor recreation area, variety of different green spaces that we'll be providing and proposing, amenities that'll serve both Hillside residents and our neighbors. We anticipate there may be some interest in some level of neighborhood commercial, and we have contemplated that and talked to the community members about that as well. And again, just highlighting, this is a mixed-use community with potential new retail, as I mentioned, and possibly office space, so it's very exciting. With that, I'll turn it over to Lisa.
Thank you, Stephen. So, as Stephen mentioned, the site is currently 16 acres owned by the Housing Authority of Clackamas County. The streets are public right-of-way. As you can see, they're mostly dead end, other than C Street, which does connect down to Meek, which then leads back to 32nd. In our conversations with the city, one thing I want to just bring up right away is C Street, which technically will connect up to 29th, is shown in the TSP as a connective street for vehicular traffic. And so we are following the TSP as part of our master plan. The other thing that, from just a street vehicular standpoint, I want to point out while we're looking at the aerial is that Hillside Court does not align with Dwyer Street across 32nd, which is a little hard to see. Dwyer Street appears sort of like a parking lot entrance, but it is indeed a right-of-way. And so as you see us move through the master plan street grid, proposed street grid, you'll see that we've been requested to align those two streets to reduce potential traffic hazards. So we have been working on this process for a year, well, a little over a year now. We started in July of last year, I believe, and the length of this process was to try to have it be a participatory process. This graph, and picking up on the comments from one of the audience members, closeout is really to close out what we consider the master plan process, not the land use process to approve the master plan. So that's what we've been hired to do, is provide a master plan that will be proposed, and then the next phase of this whole project will be the actual land use. We looked at, because this was a lengthy process, we looked at it in two different sections of how we approached the plan. The first half of our efforts were in a gathering phase, where we really tried to understand demographics, market analysis for what type of units were needed in Milwaukee. We did a very preliminary traffic analysis looking at the addition of 300 to 500 new units on the property to get a sense of what that would mean. And we understand, of course, that this will go through another traffic analysis, but at the time, Lancaster Engineering told us that it would not impact any of the major intersections any more than the city is already aware of in their transportation analysis they've done for 2035. That being said, that's just a little bit of information from some early traffic studies. We didn't do it to consider mixed-use development, and we understand completely that additional traffic studies will be required as part of the land use. Our consultants engaged in stakeholder interviews that included residents, the school district, Milwaukee Police Department, to try to understand, as there were others, to try to understand concerns. We did site research, zoning study. We did listening sessions with our residents, because first and foremost, the residents that currently live on the site will be most impacted by this master plan. And being that they're a vulnerable population, 30% and below median income, we've tried to be very aware of their needs. And so then when we got past this gathering of information, we kind of got to what we called our inflection point, and we went to refining, which basically was the beginning of the design phase. We did some internal design workshops, but we also did some community design workshops. And actually, I think what I'll just do is I'll go on to the next slide. I'll touch on that more. That was more of an overview of like gathering and then refining and creating the design itself. This is just an example of some of the diagramming we did to understand the site better. I think it's interesting to note that the west side of the site, the blue diagram down in the lower middle indicates the noise on the site. The railroad is significant. I'm sure as many people who live in the neighborhood know, and that influence some of our development. We are showing with the purple diagram on the lower corner, the infrastructure that we know that the city wanted to see, and that's based on the TSP and some other conversations with the city. The site's very unique if you look at site drainage, in that the northwestern corner is a lowered elevation. All the drainage goes down there, and what we learned about that corner of the site is that it's not adequately serviced by the sewer line. As it is, the manor, which is the tower on the site, has to pump their sewage from the basement level. So we deem that corner of the property not really suitable for development. We took a tree inventory of existing trees, and then we did some connectivity diagramming. So this is going back to our gather and inflection point and talking about some of the outreach efforts that we did during this last year, starting with listening sessions with the residents, and that was primarily, like I said, focused on the current residents of the property. Then we did 3 visioning workshops that were held, 2 in the evening, one primarily for stakeholders, but another one in the evening for residents and neighborhood, and then one in the afternoon, trying to capture some people where afternoon might have been better. During all of these outreach efforts, we also had regular meetings with our planning committee, which was our group of experts that we've assembled for this, including Housing Authority, members of Metro because they gave the money for the grant, members from the city, participation from the city, and then our various consultants. And then we had a stakeholder committee meeting and periodic milestones. And I'm sorry to hear that the timing of it, which was in the afternoon, made it challenging to attend. We did have one member of the Ardenwald Neighborhood Association who was able to attend a lot of those. So we did these visioning workshops where we tried to get a vision from the neighborhood about, and our residents, about what they wanted to see on that property. We did a sustainability workshop. Then we did a community design workshop where we had 3-dimensional building blocks and broke down into, I believe we had 10 tables participation. We had 60 participants from the community. We did a community open house, which was alluded to, where we refined what we learned from those workshop results into 3 options. And then we had people both in person and online give us feedback on those so that we can come to a master plan that we would be proposing as a draft. So in the visioning workshop, what we learned was housing density and style. There is a concern about the height, and people did tend to like 2 to 3 story buildings. The other thing we learned in that, though, was the apartment buildings that we're showing that were 4 stories tended to be 0 lot line with no greenery around them. So that was a common theme, was wider landscape areas and buffers that might be part of the right-of-way or promenades helped give a sense of a more vibrant pedestrian neighborhood and less of a urban feel. Meandering paths or pedestrian, a rich pedestrian environment was desired. A healthy community was desired, wanting access to community gardens and different type of outdoor space. Structured playgrounds, open spaces, a variety of spaces was desired. And so we took along the way with each of these outreach events, we continued to build on this vision of what this future neighborhood would be. At the community design workshop, as I said, we had 60 participants from the neighborhood and residents, and there was some common themes that came out of that. From a density standpoint, with the 10 tables, we had densities that were just shy of 400 units in addition to the 100 from the manor that will be remaining, up to close to 700 units in addition to the manor that would be remaining. So there was a wide variety. I would say most of them came down to a little over 400 units in addition to the manor, which would lead to a little over 500 units total for the property. We had conversations. There is a lot of interest in community support services on the property, and we had some robust feedback about where that seemed best located, and I'll talk about that when we get to the draft master plan. And then we also had the open house, and so we had 65 individuals attend the open house to talk about the 3 design options. And then we had an online open house that had 277 visitors come to the online open house. We had 3 concepts, and the one that was chosen is the one that we'll be walking you through. It was preferred because it had and I'll talk about a particular approach to 29th that people seem to like. It had a more disseminated network of green spaces rather than one large one. People like the street layout. They like the location of density in that one. They like the mix of housing types that we're proposing in that one, and I will walk you through that.
And I also just want to add real quickly, Lisa, I forgot to do it earlier, but concurrent to this entire process, the counties, through our public health department, along with consultants, also ran a health impact analysis that has resulted in a report that, to Lisa's point, through each one of these stages, we also ran the impacts, the health impacts for not only the residents, but also the neighborhood through each one of these lenses and each one of these processes. So when we arrive at the concept that Lisa's going to walk us through, a tremendous amount of work went into that as well to make sure that those processes were aligned, that we were taking health of the residents, the future residents that may live there, and also the neighborhood into account as well.
So this was something that throughout every one of our outreach sessions was consistent from the very beginning of the conversation with residents and neighborhood about the master plan, was if there was going to be any type of higher density, and the definition of that higher density can vary, but higher density, it seemed more appropriate along Meek Street, recognizing that the Murphy site was zoned general mixed use, and also 32nd, recognizing Providence Hospital across the street and the medical office buildings that are associated with the hospital complex. And then low density, stepping down to the Ardenwald neighborhood to the north and the single-family home residential neighborhoods. So this is our draft master plan, trying to incorporate comments, taking the preferred plan, but also incorporating some comments that we heard at the online open house. This isn't exactly the option that was chosen. We did make some changes, and I'll mention those as I go through discussing the layout. So you'll see a key plan in the upper right. We looked at trying to salvage some of the right-of-way, but what we found was when this project was constructed, it was constructed very uniquely in that most of the major utilities, storm and sewer, aren't in the right-of-ways. They run between the park housing development. So it's difficult if you salvage the right-of-way, you're not salvaging utilities. And then because of some of the alignment that we had to do with Hillside Court to get it to align with Dwyer, we were obliterating half of Hillside Court anyway. if you remember back to the aerial, all of the, except for, as I pointed out, C Street, which does connect to Meek, every other street dead ends. And because of the vision for this to be a vibrant, connected neighborhood, it was important to us to create connective streets and not have, or minimize dead ends wherever possible. So that is how we arrived at the street grid. And I'm trying to see, I don't think I have a pointer or anything that I can use.
You need to use the mouse, so use the trackpad and kind of...
Thank you. So, this is 29th, and this is the connection that many of the residents have expressed concern about. Currently, it sort of dives down and ends up sort of here because it's a diagonal. We're proposing that it has a realignment and it comes down to Meek Street here. It is proposed that there be sharrows for this to be a bike greenway, which is just painted arrows in the street. It's not a painted bike lane itself. We had a lot of conversations about whether or not we should transition to a bike lane or even a separate bike lane or an elevated lane on a sidewalk, and the feeling was that was confusing because the rest of the neighborhood would have sharrows, and then we'd be going for 2 blocks onto a different type of bike lane and then potentially going onto a different type bike lane. So from a bike connection standpoint, we're proposing that 29th would continue the sharrows. We're proposing that this right-of-way, we've heard some conversation about this being rezoned. The right-of-way width that we're proposing is no different than the right-of-way width that's current on to the north, which is a 60-foot right-of-way, like a typical residential street. So we're proposing that this be sharrows down to Meek, and then at Meek it would go to dedicated bike lane because we're still working with the city to determine then how that bike connectivity would happen south of the site. I think there originally in some of the TSP there was the idea it would come through the Murphy site to the south, but at least there is a potential development happening there, and there's a lot of conversation about what's going on with that. So for now, we're proposing that the bike lane would start on Meek Street and then potentially continue onto 32nd. So from a bike connectivity standpoint, that's what we're doing with 29th. The other thing that we're proposing with 29th is that it have a more robust pedestrian landscape strip along here, and I'll show you a street section on that later. Dwyer would be the new north access off of 32nd, aligning across the way. And then, of course, we would have Meek Street would also be an access point off of 32nd. Hillside Court, we've renamed, Hillside Court is up here, we've renamed it down here. Would connect Hillside Manor with this side of the property, but the city doesn't want to see another access point onto 32nd. The distances aren't adequate. And so what we're proposing is that this be deeded as a pedestrian easement. So there would always be a dedicated pedestrian connection between this end of the site and 32nd. So from a roadway standpoint, the last thing is that Meek Street right now currently ends here at C Street, which would be the future 29th. We're proposing that it continue on and provide additional connection to the manor. From a standpoint of how these lots would be developed, if you look at the key plan, I'm going to start with Lot J, because that we're keeping dedicated open space. It currently does have a walking path around this area with periodic exercise station stops. And so we would be proposing to keep that. What we would propose, though, is that a pedestrian connection be built that would allow this end of, I should mention that, as I said, this is quite a bit lower than the rest of the property. And so we're proposing that a staircase and a graded ramp that would be accessible would allow pedestrian connections so that this open space could be better shared by the rest of the Hillside Manor development, Hillside Park development, but also the greater neighborhood. I mentioned that this one was, this option had been desired because of its distributed open space. So other than this large open space area, we're proposing multiple variety of open space on multiple lots. The manor is going to remain and is getting, currently is under the process of going through a renovation. The design of the renovation, the construction will begin in next year.
Correct.
I talked about a strong desire for some type of community support services, whether it be a Boys and Girls Club, a community center that might have rooms that could be used for multiple purposes. We've identified the lot in this corner as the best lot for that, and part of that is because of the noise issue with the railroad and the idea that no one wanted to ever put residential right up against the railroad. We are saying that there would be residential above this building, but it can be mitigated to address the noise issues. We're also proposing that a new either sound wall or tree hedge would be built along this west side to help mitigate the noise. And we've engaged with an acoustician who can help us kind of determine whether or not that's going to be, what would be the best way to mitigate noise from the train. So that's kind of a general west side of the site. The the community center is the main kind of community-focused area. The other purple buildings are the mixed-use buildings that would have the potential for commercial. And as the diagram showed, those are the buildings where, those were the lots that were identified as desirable for the higher density. So lots A and lots E, fronting 32nd, we're proposing would have first a ground floor commercial with housing above. We are proposing that those properties on fronting on lots E, A, B, and B be allowed to have a 4-story height. But the heights on the remaining properties we're showing are 3 stories or 2 stories. And one instance I want to point out where we did incorporate some community feedback at the open house is at Lot G. We had originally shown those as 3-story townhomes. We can achieve the same density goals of the master plan with those being 2-story townhomes. And what we would be exploring as we move forward with the master plan process would be setting height limits, step-down height limits to the north to address the single-family neighborhood to the north. So where we're saying that some areas of the site, it might be appropriate to have taller heights, we also recognize other areas of the development, it's not necessarily appropriate to have those same heights. So the pink units are more 2-story townhome, row house type development. And one thing that I think one of the reasons why this one was favored over all the others was what we did with, we added lot K right here. So you'll see in the key plan, that's a skinny little lot. And what that did is allow us to get more of a feeling of the closer to the single-family, lower-scale neighborhood along 29th until we get down here to the community center. And what this does, it's a very small development. It's only 12 units that we're showing, but it would be opportunity, it's well-scaled for homeownership. And so the Housing Authority is interested in potentially partnering. Not to say that Lot G also couldn't potentially be home ownership as well, because that housing typology would lend itself really well to that. So from a mixture of housing typology, the pink area is the area where we were trying to appropriately scale the proposed development to the single-family neighborhood. The blue that you see is more of a 3-story walk-up type housing typology. And so it can sometimes appear a little bit more like a cottage development. You can have ground floor units and then stairs leading up to a second floor where you enter townhomes that are over flats. And so that housing typology also can lend itself to a massing and a scale that can feel like it's one that steps down to single-family neighborhoods as well. So it's only the purple and the yellow buildings where, in order to achieve the density that we're proposing on those, would be more of a traditional apartment elevator style building. You can see, I'm going to go into it a little bit more, but you can see from this key, existing deciduous and existing conifer trees are indicated by these diagrams. This is another area where we modified our plan to incorporate comments we received in the open house. There's an extremely large mature tree here. We had already indicated that this was going to be a plaza and a pedestrian easement, but we widened that so that for the protection of that tree. We're also trying to modify the development to protect mature trees, especially along this property line, again, recognizing that transition from the existing neighborhood to the new proposed master plan. So, let's see. The one thing I think, what was I? Oh, so Meek Street, we're showing as a half-street improvement, hopefully to be shared with the Murphy site. And I want to talk about now some of the densities being proposed. If you aggregate all of the densities on each of these parcels, it's about 40 units per acre for the entire 16 acres. So that is consistent, that's more consistent with your general mixed-use development. But what I want to point out is that if you're just going to look at lots G and F and aggregate the density that we're proposing there, that is completely consistent with the current comp plan medium density residential designation that you have with your comp plan. And so our feeling is that the medium density designation for your comp plan, which would allow, with the bonus, 20% bonus density, would allow 25 units an acre. That is what we're proposing for the parcels that are closest to the neighborhood to the north. Now, we recognize as part of this plan development, as Vera and Aaron mentioned, it's going to go through a zone change. The plan development itself will be a zone, and so there'll be many, many comments moving forward, but I wanted to especially highlight that. The rest of the development here would be more consistent with the town center zoning designation of the Murphy site to the south. And it also then is consistent to the 2015 study that was done for the central Milwaukee area. And so it essentially extend that concept 2 blocks to the north. Lastly, I want to point out that this proposal has 43% open space. It's actually slightly higher because I found out right before coming over here we had calculated the total square footage higher. And our tree canopy coverage for the entire site is actually 42%, not 40% at maturity. So we're meeting the goals of tree canopy and we're exceeding the goals of open space. And just wanted to point out that, and I'll just touch on really lightly, that our basic street section for 29th would be the same street section. It's a typical residential street section. Through the master plan process, working with the city engineering, we could reduce that because that's part of what is open to us as a toolkit for the master plan, is to actually modify and not use one of the typical street sections for the city. That could be looking at ways of doing traffic calming, queuing streets where you actually have narrower drive lanes, sometimes slow traffic down, or do absolutely slow traffic down. It's one way to slow traffic down rather than speed bumps. So there are different toolkits that we can explore as ways of slowing traffic down. I think the other thing I wanted to point out is Hillside Court. We're proposing this street as being almost not quite a Woonorf, but one where we have extended tree wells into the traffic lane. And we're indicating, it's a little washed out on your screen, I apologize, but we're indicating that this would have potential for specialized paving. These could even be raised intersections here, and that is a really wonderful way to also alert people that this is a pedestrian zone and to slow people down. So we'll be exploring those different design toolkits that we have to calm traffic on 29th. I think also the idea that Hillside Court is a pretty narrow, or it's not a continuous street, and its adjacency to the community center. A lot of people like the idea of closing down the street for festivals, for farmers markets, for those types of events as ways of creating a community heart. Lastly, this will be phased. It won't happen all at once. And so, and also for several reasons, monetary reasons, but also there are 100 families that will be greatly impacted by this development, and minimizing relocation and doing it in stages will make that easier for the housing authority and easier for the residents. So phase one, the proposed phase one would be doing lots A and B. The red marks here are the households that would have to be relocated. It's, I believe, about 35 households, and they would be temporarily relocated. They would have tenant protection and the opportunity to move back into the new housing. This shows the right-of-way that would have to get vacated, and then the proposed right-of-way that would have to be dedicated. Phase two we're proposing would be Lot C. Similarly, you'll see that, and we have already done, I haven't brought it today, but we've done a preliminary proposed utility plan and shown how that would be phased as well. One of the reasons why we picked the phasing coming from the south moving to the north is the higher density housing would be built first, which would allow some of the relocation housing to happen. Also, the utilities are available on Meek, readily available on Meek, and by improving Meek first and making it connect to the manor, when the realignment of Hillside Court to Dwyer happens, there will still be access to the site from the south from Meek. And then finally, phase three would be the final 5 lots. So.
Thank you very much. Very helpful information. Appreciate all the history and work that you've done and in planning for tonight to come here with this good comprehensive product for us to think about here tonight. So I will remind the commissioners that this is not a hearing, so this is not a time for deliberation, but we will allow some clarifying questions of staff since they're here. So if you guys have some questions, let's do it.
I have some.
Yeah, go ahead.
So in the, when you look at the transition from the current site to the new site, it seems like we go from a situation where, at least in the non-tower residence, we go from either single residencies or duplexes to a much more higher density housing units. What is the sort of the response from the current residents to that?
It's varied. Some of them see the benefit of the newer housing and the new amenities and recognize that that can outweigh some of what they're going to miss. I think that many people will miss the ground floor units and the ability to walk out onto their own space. I want to point out that that all of this housing, except for the purple right here with the hatching through it, would have ground floor residential, and they would have their own patios. So a percentage of all of the residents, even in the apartment buildings, would have the opportunity to have ground floor units with their own patio and outdoor space. So that's part of the conversation that we had, and it also addresses the concern that people didn't like apartment buildings that came right up to the sidewalk. Apartment buildings that had a layering of public to semi-public to private were much more desirable. The early phases will be higher density, more apartment style housing, but the later phases will be lower density housing. And correct me if I'm wrong, Stephen, but there potentially would be the opportunity to move as the to transition.
Yes,
to that.
that is correct. And it is our intention that there is opportunity throughout the entire development, not only in its mixed income, but also in its mixed design. And so we have heard feedback from several residents that are interested in the new development because they have the opportunity to transition into something, to Lisa's point, that's new, that has the new amenities, but also to sort of have the chance to weave themselves into a new environment and a new neighborhood mix.
Could you give us some insight into who you see as potential commercial renters in this?
It's a pretty small commercial area that we're indicating with that diagonal hatch, and so it's really neighborhood commercial, small scale. 1,000 square feet would be the typical size that you would see, so it would be small cafe, restaurant, small service business, tax preparer, something like that. You know, with the hospital across the street, it might not be urgent care, but, you know, a small scale urgent care, something like that. But that type of development is scaled to serve neighborhood needs and not regional needs.
This one's for you. So I see a couple more yellow cards in the audience. Will they have an opportunity to put those in at this evening?
Well, we do have a hearing following this, so I'm trying to keep
We've got
to
a lot of folks
schedule.
who've come out, and I would just like to give them their 3 minutes if we can.
Okay, after our Q&A, we'll take a few more yellow cards, but we will be limiting it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So with Lancaster Engineering's preliminary transportation study, did that in any way take into consideration the income mix and the fact that lower income households have a lower rate of vehicle ownership?
No, it actually didn't.
Okay.
They just used typical residential.
Single family or medium density. Okay.
Medium.
Yeah. Okay. And then.
And it's true that the car ownership on the site currently is much lower than average.
Do you know what the percentage is offhand?
For the tower, it's 0.3, I believe.
It's very, very low.
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. The health impact assessment, will that be made available publicly?
Yes. So it's currently working its way through frankly, up to our Board of County Commissioners and being presented on now, and will be posted on our website, and we can link everybody to that once it's deemed final.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. And then the Metro Region 2040 plan designates 32nd Avenue as a main street. Was that taken into consideration?
Well, I think in the way that we wanted to locate the small-scale residential-sized commercial there, yes.
Okay.
And the pedestrian connections that we were trying to, even though we couldn't create a street extension for Hillside Court, we very much wanted to create a lively and robust pedestrian experience on there.
Yeah, I think that's a good compromise between having that tight grid, because you still preserve the tight grid for pedestrians, and that's the important part. Yeah,
the connectivity.
And then my last question was, actually, I do have two more, I think. Did you consider advisory bike lanes on the extension of 29th or C Street or whatever you're calling it, where it's basically red paint or bike lanes on the shoulders with a skinnier traffic lane in the middle?
We did, and there was just concern that there might be a switch from the Sharrows to that approach to then when we were not entirely certain what was going to happen when you get to 32nd, and that we're really only a 3-block length of bike lane, and not to say we can't revisit that, but we originally had a raised bike lane along 29th on the west side of 29th there that was completely separated from traffic. But if you're in traffic and then you're off traffic and then you're back in traffic again, there was concern.
I would definitely request that you look at eliminating the Sharrows.
Okay.
Sharrows are useless in my experience, so that would be good. The other question I had is about the you were mentioning the sewerage draining. And that at the northwest corner of the site is where it wants to go by gravity, but there's not appropriate.
No, actually, the sewer lines are accessed, they go south to Meek.
So it's stormwater.
It's stormwater that does go north, and so we're proposing a completely new sewer system for this development because the system, one, it's in the wrong location, it's not in right-of-ways, and it's also aged. But the storm system, conceptually, we could have green streets. We'd try to manage as much as possible on the site, but our civil engineer has also been talking with the city and believes there is capacity for the density that we're proposing.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we were considering how we could treat the stormwater in place and try to hold,
And part of our sustainability goals would be to do that.
Perfect.
And one thing I want to mention is any affordable housing that would be built in this property, almost any housing would be getting tax credits through the state.
Correct.
And that's the main funding for affordable housing. And actually, any housing that is funded through the tax credit program has to be third-party green building certified. So it'll be LEED for homes, it'll be Earth Advantage or Earth Advantage multifamily housing. Recent projects that I've done, or our firm has done rather, have been either gold or platinum level. And so this neighborhood will be far more sustainable than any private development multifamily housing. And that would include approach to stormwater.
So my last comment would be to really seriously consider not linking to 29th Avenue to the north, if that's possible.
I think that that's something that we'll have conversations with the city on, because I wanted to be clear about that. It's in the TSP, and so that's why it's in our master plan.
Right. Correct. Thank you.
I was just curious, can you comment on the number of parking spaces, or just how did you come to those numbers? Are they at...
So they are there's a mixture, and that's part of a conversation. Where we have the pink, the sort of more single family, it's a 1-to-1 ratio, or better. Where we have the blue, it's at 0.8, which is something that your current code would recognize. If you're near a transit street, you can get a 20% reduction in the 1-to-1 requirement. At the community center, we're also at almost 0.1. So it's really lots D, E, B, and A, those 4 lots where we're looking at D is also 0.8. It's really E, A, and B where we have the highest density, where we're looking at potentially a much lower parking count. And that one is at closer to 0.3 for most of those developments.
Okay. And then to the comments that were made about the density of the units, and so in your history of the project, has the messaging and the quantity of units been consistent with the message that's been given to the public in terms of 400 new units and 100 existing from the manor and replacement units of 100? That's just been consistent as far as you're concerned?
I believe that there was absolutely, we obviously weren't messaging well. The website that you can go to understand the master plan and the flyer that was handed out at the very beginning says up to 400 new units. And as I said in the community design workshop, I would say the aggregate of the options that were created were slightly above 400 units that were new, therefore more like 530 units total. What we're proposing is 600 units total. So it is higher than that would include the manor. So, but I think that the definition of new or the definition of that, I think, is been confusing. But if you go back and look at all of the printed material that was handed out, it does say 400, and it's unfortunate that we were not clear at all. This was an exploratory approach to see what the site what would be appropriate for the site. And as I said, many people were pushing to get up to 700 units. So.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, the Housing Authority of Clackamas County, as well as our Board of County Commissioners, set a policy objective some time ago that was for every unit of public housing that we are going through a demolition process on, that when we replace that unit, we'd also create an additional 400 units. And I think that there's been, and I think to Lisa's point, we could have done a better job of being clearer that 4-to-1 ratio that we're talking about is 400 new units in addition to every replacement. So every time we do a replacement unit, we have an additional 4 units. That 4-to-1 ratio, we could have done a better job of communicating about. And when we talk about that, it's, with the manor is that additional 100 units. There was confusion amongst ourselves with that. We asked SEA to clarify in the key to show the net new units of 400, which I do feel has been consistent. I think that the way that we communicated that and clarified that, we could have done a much better job of.
I think the other thing to point out, though, is that this is an exploratory process to see what is appropriate density for the site. And as was stated earlier, that we're going to have to prove this is the appropriate density as part of the land use process. And there will be many things that will be discussed, including transportation and traffic impacts, how we're going to rezone the site and what's appropriate. Are we meeting the standards of the planned development? So there are many opportunities to have this conversation in the future.
Commissioner Hemer go.
Can you describe what the setup of a unit is and what's the mixture of a one-bedroom to a two-bedroom to a three-bedroom to a four-bedroom?
So when we looked at this, we had a demographic analysis done and an economic analysis, and it was surprising to say that really the highest demand was for one-bedroom units. That being said, we approached this looking at anywhere where you see purple, yellow, or blue, it's a mixture of one and two bedrooms. And so we were looking at still family units where you see, actually I'd take it back, where you see the pink, it can be 2 to 3 bedroom, even 4 bedroom, and then the blue could be 3 bedroom as well. So when we do these density counts, we are looking at least 50% 2 bedrooms.
And then in the affordable housing world, is it to a family? Let's say a two-bedroom. Is it to a family or is it to two different people that are going to be living together as roommates?
Yeah, so in the world, in the financing that we anticipate that we would use for this, we'd be talking about a family. To Lisa's point earlier, first off, we have the Metro Affordable Housing Bond, which has been passed. $116.2 million will be coming to Clackamas County for the development of new units of affordable housing within the urban growth boundary. Within one of the major tenets of that affordable housing bond is that 50% of those units that are developed, so in our case right here, a little over 400 units must be family-sized units, 2-bedroom and above. And so, we followed that methodology when we brought that over to the long-term development of this, that we're 50% of the units we're anticipating will be 2-bedroom and above here. In addition to that, the main leverage vehicle that we have to come along with that financing is the low-income housing tax credit, which we talked about before. The credit that we would be pursuing, largely, we would encourage those that would come and help us. The Housing Authority of Clackamas County will not be the only developers in this site. We will go out for what are called requests for participation or requests for proposal for these different lots to get nonprofits, for-profits, others to help us build this vision. And so we anticipate that for the affordable units that those developers will be leveraging the 4% low-income housing tax credit, which is a non-competitive source. And in that, under its guidelines and the way that the lease structure would work, and just for somebody to income qualify for that affordable unit, it would have to be a family. You wouldn't necessarily have two roommates sharing something like that.
Okay.
Commissioner Argo?
Just to get to the phasing again. So the first phase is about the low-income qualified housing applicants and or the units for the low-income housing qualified.
We anticipate in the way that we would approach this is that lots, I just lost my lots, A and B.
A and B.
Sorry. A and B would probably go simultaneously. One of those, A, on the south east corner there along 32nd, we anticipate would be one of the mixed-use buildings, so it might have higher incomes, may be something that a market rate developer or something wants to come in and take that on. In addition to that, Lot B, we had anticipated that would be a housing authority project, and that would be the beginning of our replacement unit process.
Okay. And there's, three phases conceptualized? Is that right?
Conceptualized, there are 3 phases. I think part of what we're trying to do here is as part of the plan development, I think the city has given a 7-year timeline for this with the potential for, I think, a 2-year extension. But as Stephen said, the Housing Authority isn't capable of doing this entire development by themselves. And so if you look up at the screen, the first 2 lots on the left-hand side, A and B, potentially C then would go next. And the main thing we're trying to convey is C would have to go next because we do need Meek Street to continue up to the tower and maintain that connection. But C might go concurrently with D. The main thing we're trying to convey is C would be the next domino that would fall. And
Is the 2-year extension contingent on certain occupancy targets or goals? Or units sold, transactional based, or you just apply for it and it happens?
No, I think we're talking about different things. The planned development process that we're going through, I believe, is going to...
how long you have the clock for the planned
Exactly,
development.
yes.
Thank you. Okay, thanks. That's what I appreciate it. Okay.
Thank you. So I just have one question. So what's your approach for neighborhood involvement at this stage, right? I mean, so you've done all this work, done a year of planning, and some engagement. I attended a meeting or 2 about this, so appreciate that. But how are you going to go back out and share this more robust vision at this time?
So we do have this meeting. We have a meeting in front of City Council, again, a work session, and then we'll have a meeting with the county commissioners, which will also be for informational purposes. But we also have on our community outreach 1 more open house before we sort of finalize this to get input.
Okay.
And then, as you noted, there will be, or as was noted, there will be many more opportunities for both public comment, but we, of course, would also go to the neighborhood for comment as well. We don't have a formalized outreach plan for the next phase for the land use development process yet. One thing that is interesting is we did try to do outreach, both with the neighborhood association, with putting, we had various ways of outreach with putting news in the pilot, and we got pretty good participation, but it's difficult. We didn't get great participation. I feel like it's obviously come to the point now where there is a lot more interest in the neighborhood, and that's never a bad thing. That's a good thing. We actually wanted participation from the neighborhood, so we're not going to shy away from it. We will engage and get feedback.
Great. Thank you. Any final questions? I'm sorry, sir, we're going to hold off for a minute on public questions. Thank you. Commissioners, any final? Okay.
I'll ask one more question. Yeah. Has there been any consideration to mixed-use multimodal area designation?
Sorry?
A mixed-use multimodal area designation with the state to assist with the transportation impact study that'll come later?
No.
No, there has not.
That's going to come. That's going to have to come after they do development review process.
Okay.
And that's going to be region, but that's going to be tricky, probably.
Yeah, it's just curious if that had been a topic of conversation.
It had not been discussed yet.
It is not, no.
Interesting. And I want to thank you for also reminding us about the Central Milwaukee Area Plan as well from 2015. Just, for those of us who, and for neighborhood members as well, maybe have participated in some of these processes, it's a good reminder to think about, where these conversations have been over time, and maybe dust off that copy and revisit it and remember, what came out of that process. But thank you for referencing that. Okay, well, we really appreciate you guys coming tonight, and thanks for this information, and look forward to hearing more as this progresses, and good luck. It's a huge project.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
So I will take a few more comments for those who did not get a chance. So it looks like I have 2, which is, okay.
Chair Travis, for
Yes.
those that have arrived late, it might be prudent to restate the status of the hearing.
I will. Now that I see 4,
The testimony that they're allowed to give and...
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. So are you suggesting that we don't take any more comments because it may be considered part of...
Well, there's no record that's
Right.
been opened, and so
Right.
public comment isn't an opportunity to respond to what you've heard in the informational hearing.
Okay.
Many of those that arrived late didn't hear the comments that were previously made, and so they might repeat them. So I thought,
Yeah.
since they arrived late, it might be wise to briefly state the nature of this proceeding.
Yes.
Basically
Right.
how we started off.
Right, okay, right. So a reminder that this is informational only. The land use application has not been submitted. And so we're following the protocol that, this is not a hearing, so we are, nothing will go on the record at this point. So I wanted to reiterate that. As you heard from the county, there will be lots of opportunities for public comment and hearings as this moves forward. So taking the guidance of the city attorney, I think I'll go ahead and limit our discussion at this point.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, though, that it was on the website that there would be public comment. I was late because I don't have childcare and we don't provide it, and it's not an opportune time in the day.
Okay, I'm going to repeat this for the audience at home. So a member of the audience has asked that there be allowed comment as she arrived late and missed the comment section. I will also point out that the flyer was not a city flyer that was sent forward. So just to reiterate that.
Something on the website, though, that clearly stated that there would be public comment today. And
I'll look to the attorney. So should we take additional comments, or should we move forward at this point?
The period for public comment for items not on the agenda is already passed. I leave it to the chair's discretion if she wants to allow a few folks to speak for 3 minutes, but it's your discretion to limit that.
Okay.
Does it hurt?
I think the important part is that the comments here aren't speaking to any sort of record that's been created. There will be multiple times through this process, and I would urge those of you that have already commented, if you wish to raise those comments again in a public proceeding, it's your responsibility to come to a proceeding where there will be a record created where you can submit all of those comments.
I think the fear is it may be too late at that point, and that commissioners need to hear concerns now before the planning goes ahead.
Well, we don't, there's nothing for you to comment on at this point because we don't have an application.
All right. Let's go ahead and hear the public comment then, please. So for those four that would like to, can you please bring your cards up here, and we will move forward with 3 minutes per person. Okay. John Brown? Please remember to state your name and address to the record. Thank you.
John Brown, 3023 Southeast Malcolm Street, and I won't take all 3 minutes. I wanted to briefly touch on one of the aspects of the plan, which is the 40 or so-called 42% maturity canopy coverage at maturity. And so I'm a arborist with intimate experience and understanding of exactly what is necessary to establish trees and bring them to maturity. And over 10 years of experience, I have seen that developers typically fail at this task, often within 6 to 12 months. So we have a development right now with several mature trees, lots of canopy. What we're looking at is a picture that involves lots of little green dots that look lovely on the screen, but it seems to me that there's a very high probability that's not really realistic. So my recommendation to the Planning Commission is to put the trees on a bond, to have the developer put the money up and get money back after 10, 15, 20 years, if the trees have thrived in that time period. Because unlike other infrastructure, trees, which I consider green infrastructure and quite significant for climate preparedness, and so on. When a utility box goes out, the residents will notify someone, and that utility box will be promptly replaced. When one of those trees dies because it's been planted improperly at the wrong time of year, the wrong species, at the wrong depth, with insufficient water, insufficient establishment care, insufficient pruning, in other words, done by a developer, when one of those trees dies, there will be no accountability and no replacement. Whatever type of development goes on, and I'm speaking to the area of my expertise, which is arboriculture. Other people have spoken to traffic and housing density and areas of those people's expertise, but it's a significant situation. Bringing canopy in, and to say 42%, well, you know, that's like saying, well, there's 400 units, well, now there's 700. So we've had a lot of misinformation. Let's not let this canopy coverage be another type of misinformation that we foolishly accept at face value today, and in the future find it very difficult to redo. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Costello.
Chris Costello, 9906 Southeast 29th Avenue. I'm here, thank you, Mayor and council members, to... Sorry, I thought this, yeah, Commissioner, sorry.
That was a compliment.
It's the first time I've ever been in this thing. We bought our house on that street, dead-end street, for the purpose because we have a 3-year-old. There's no sidewalks. It's quiet. And then I showed up earlier. I was a little late. I have a baby born with spina bifida, and having cars go down that street scares me because she's not going to be as mobile when she gets older. If there were sidewalks included in this whole thing that would go past on 29th up, improvements, maybe that would be a little better, but I come from Portland, and I grew up in Portland, and I saw it go from single housing to now multi, and houses are just disappearing, going into apartments. My grandfather, they demolished 3 houses and put a multi-story low-income housing. They only accounted for 0.5 parking spaces per unit. And my grandfather, at 97 years old, has to put paint cans out with cement in his driveway and along the front of his house so he can get his mail, because people will park there and park in front of his driveway and block it. And we won't even go into the increased problems they've had with the area. But I do believe in increasing density. I do believe in having some more housing. But my concern mainly is with 29th. If for some reason they wanted to make it like an emergency egress place where they could have a gate on it where in an emergency they can open up so people can get out, I think that would be acceptable, at least to my family. But my concern is increased traffic on the road. And I've been here a little over 3 years, and there used to be a fence there. We didn't have problems with people coming by on bikes and digging our garbage cans and stuff. Fence got opened up, and we've been having a lot more traffic down our street. I don't know where they're coming from. I don't know if they're from the housing, but my concern is when you open that up is you have more and more people who will use it as a thoroughfare in the middle of the night. And I work late. I get home late. And it's not uncommon to have guys come by towing little trailers with headlamps on and the dog across the street barking at all hours of the day. So my main concern is with 29th, because I live on it, to take that in consideration, that if you guys proceed with this development or agree to do it, to take that in consideration, that maybe 29th should not be open to be kept just a passageway for bikes and pedestrians. Thank you.
Thank you. Heather Sparks.
Hi, thanks for listening to my comment. So after seeing...
State your name and address for the record. Thank you.
I'm Heather Sparks, and I live on 37th Street between Harvey and King. And so I'm right around the corner from this proposed development. I'm a few blocks away from the proposed Monroe development, and I'm around the corner from the 2 proposed cottage cluster developments. And it's a lot of development happening at once. And so, and after living in several cities, both as a child and an adult. I'm familiar with the way different types of housing can shape communities. And so my biggest concern after listening to this presentation today is that the green space is way to the back by the freeway and has this funny pedestrian overpass thing. I'm not quite sure why it was planned that way instead of integrating into the community so that it could be a park space that all of the neighbors could use, so that these low-income neighbors are not annexed behind a wall of high-density housing that essentially walls off this complex and creates, like, sorry, but potentially a higher crime hub. Simply because in studies of most affordable housing, towers create these walls and interior spaces where people who have dysfunctional issues end up acting out. And so I don't understand why this isn't being designed as a community that could be more integrated into the existing single-family neighborhood that exists. It just feels really, sorry, but it feels really outmoded as a design for affordable housing. And I've seen housing designs for affordable housing that are just great and work really well, especially when those communities aren't just servicing people below a certain economic median, but actually are designed to attract real economic diversity. And given how convenient Milwaukee is to commuting into downtown Portland now, I don't see why that wouldn't be one approach to this design. It just feels really short-sighted, and especially the plan to open up 29th to cars when that's the only safe cycling route. And I thought that the mandate for this whole project was based around creating higher density so that people would use public transportation more, would stop using their cars as much. We have the opportunity to plant out medians at 224 at Harrison and 99 to connect to the existing bike path, the new beautiful bike path that went in, and no one's even bothered to plant that space out. But we'd have a direct pathway, and if a hop-on, hop-off stop at the Waldorf School were included, which wouldn't even require a platform, we'd have 3 modes of transportation that would be alternative to cars. We'd have walking and cycling and public transportation, greater access to public transportation. Plus, it would open up the entire entire commerce area of downtown Milwaukee. People could walk to dinner at night or go out to get a drink without driving their cars. So I'm just sorry. I'm just really, I've been asking questions and my time's up, but I just urge this committee to please ask for design alternatives to this and to really consider what could be done in this city that could be so remarkable and really a model for other cities in integrating lower income housing into a neighborhood that doesn't necessarily want it and making it flourish, making this community into something that people really want to live near.
Gonna have to, thank you so much. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I will remind you that this is not a hearing, so as you heard, please sign up in the hallway so that you can find out when the land use application is submitted. And please stay tuned for more information from the county about their open house that they're planning so that you can come. It's great to see so many people engaged. There's still time. No decision has been made. We're not deliberating any further about this tonight. But, really appreciate the information at this stage in the game and look forward to more information as this unfolds. Are we good? Okay.
And I just want to say thank you very much. And one of the reasons I think we're all
sorry, but
is that we
can't hear you. I'm sorry, you have to, we're going to have to.
I just wanted to thank you, but I also wanted to say that one of the reasons we're all here is that no one got flyers, or very few people got flyers in their mailboxes inviting them to the open house. Very few people have time to comb the pilot.
Sorry, I have to cut you off.
I just would urge your developers to reach out more.
Thanks, everyone. We're going to move on to the public hearing.
You handled that well. You did. You did a good job.
Sorry.
Okay. We're going to move forward with the public hearing. Okay.
Reading
The public hearing on the home occupation variance request is called to order. The purpose of this hearing is to consider application number VR-2019-004. The purpose of the application is to request a home occupation variance request on property located at 511 Southeast Lake Road, Milwaukee, Oregon, 97222. The applicant has the burden of proving that the application is consistent with the City of Milwaukee's zoning subdivision ordinance, comprehensive plan, and any applicable municipal code provision. The applicant has the burden of proving that the proposal conforms with all of the city's applicable criteria. I now ask staff to cite the zoning ordinance sections where the criteria can be found.
Yep, the applicable criteria are Milwaukee Municipal Code Chapter 12.16, Access Management, Section 19.301, Low-Density Residential Zones, including R10, Section 19.507, Home Occupation Standards, Section 19.607, Off-Street Parking Standards for Residential Areas, Chapter 19.700, Public Facility Improvements, Section 19.911, Variances, and Section 19.1006, Type 3 Review.
All testimony and evidence must be directed toward the applicable substantive criteria. Failure to address a criterion or raise an issue with sufficient detail to allow the Planning Commission an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue precludes appeal to the City Council based on that issue. Failure to raise constitutional or other issues related to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow response precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Any party with standing may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission to the City Council. Persons with standing are those who submit written comments or testify in person or sign the Planning Commission attendance sign-up sheet in the hallway. I will recognize those persons who have completed the testimony cards and have given them to me. When you come to the podium, please state your name and address for the record so they may be entered into the minutes. If you are here to testify, please remember to confine your remarks to the application and the relevant criteria and to avoid repetition and irrelevant information. If additional documents or evidence are provided by any party, the Commission may, if requested, allow a continuance or leave the record open to allow the parties a reasonable opportunity to respond. Any such continuance or extension shall be subject to the limitations of the 120-day rule unless the continuance or extension is requested or agreed to by the applicant. All right. Conflicts of interest and site visits. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to abstain from this hearing?
No.
Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest?
No.
Yes. So this application, since it's on the very edge of the city, was reviewed by the Oak Grove Community Council. I was actually not present at that meeting. It was the day after our last Planning Commission meeting, and I was sick for both of those days, so I missed both of those meetings. And I don't know what became of that, but I didn't see any comments submitted from the OGCC in our comment packets, but I at least wanted to mention that that was a thing.
Yeah.
I did not participate in that review. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to report on any ex parte contacts?
No.
Will any commissioner who has visited the site prior to this hearing please raise their hand?
Aye.
Very quickly.
And say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Did any of those commissioners who visited the site speak to anyone at the site or note anything different from what is indicated in the staff report for this application?
No.
Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the participation of any member of the Planning Commission? Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to hear this matter? Let's proceed to the staff report presentation.
Can we ask that the temperature of this room be turned down from Arctic to something a little bit?
If anybody has control, okay.
Now that
Mary's on it.
occupancy is down significantly in this room.
Right. Generated some heat
Thank
for a
you.
few minutes. I'm actually a little sweaty myself, so.
You
Hi, Brett. Down.
Slightly, please.
Wait, you want the air conditioning turned down?
No, she wants it warmer.
Warm, yeah. You put a sweater on.
I know.
I would have said, yes, please turn it up, but I got you.
Raise the temperature.
Yes, raise the temperature
Raise
as
the
in
temperature.
warmer,
I'm
as
sorry
in
if I
not
missed
cold. Thank you.
All right, good evening, Chair Travis, Commissioners. I'm Brett Kelver. I'm an associate planner with the city, and I'll be walking you through this application tonight. It's my first hearing with Commissioner Loosevelt, joining you on the commission. I worked with her as the chair of the DLC, and so I just want to say welcome and congratulations
Thank you,
as well.
sir.
Baby. All right, so why are we here? Milwaukee Wellness Center, founded in 2009-ish at the site 5111 Southeast Lake Road. Dr. David Mealy, the applicant, was here and has operated that business as a home occupation at the site for that time. So he lives in the house, in the primary house there, and has operated the wellness center for a decade. A few years ago, and he can tell you a little bit more if you're interested in details or if that's relevant to the story. He also, I understand, has a woodworking hobby, and at some point that woodworking hobby evolved into a sort of business, Milwaukee Hardwoods, and the city became aware of this business when he had a contract with the city to do some work with some of the trees that were coming off a couple of development sites downtown, so to process those. And to be appropriate and above board, he was asked to register as a business. And so, as was our process, we looked into this and saw that we had 2 businesses on the site, which is allowable according to the code, except there are some limitations. And one of those is if you have 2 home businesses, you cannot have any non-resident employees. And so we ran into a little bit of a code problem here. And talking over the options with Dr. Mealy, he agreed to go through the variance process to try to address those. So that's how we've gotten here. It's a short version of that story. So the home occupation rules, the point of the background, the idea of this is to provide an opportunity for residents in the city who have some interest in starting some kind of a small business operation without having to necessarily put up the expense of establishing a separate site. So, and there's a whole range of different kinds of things that people can do, from online things to consulting and home-based landscaping businesses, all kinds of things. The idea is that however, that you primarily maintain the residential aspect of the business. It's still primarily supposed to be the place that you live, and not look like a business, and not detract in some way, whether it's by trips to and from the site, or if you were trying to store material or equipment, that kind of thing at the site. The idea is the person should drive by the place and still mostly think it looks like a business. And so these standards are very discretionary, and they're kind of performance-based. I mean, most of the time we only hear about problems with home occupations if there is a problem, if someone's complaining about noise or smoke or a lot of material being stored, that kind of thing. That obviously wasn't the case here. It was a little bit more of our bureaucratic procedure, but that is the idea of a home-based business, is recognition that some of the residents in town want to have that opportunity to do a business. At some point, maybe that business grows, and then they maybe do have to look for another spot for the business because it may no longer work at their home site. But the idea is overall to protect, I guess, the residential character of the residential neighborhood that they're in. So, in talking with the applicant, we tried to identify what were the problems that he was running into, what were the variances that he was going to need to the home occupation standards. And one of them was he had, before he started his hardwood business, he had some employees at the wellness center during that decade of time. And so through this technicality of him starting a new business that didn't involve any new employees because of the restriction of the code, now we have a problem. So one variance request was to allow him to continue to have some employees who did not reside at the site while he had more than one business. And kind of once we opened the variance door and he agreed to take this process, staff talked with him and kind of encouraged him to, while you're here, why don't you go ahead and ask for what you'd really like for the site. So you get 3 variance requests with your application, so what else? And so he took us up on that, and he said, well, I'd also like to have more than 2 home-based businesses. I have some ideas about some other things that I might do at the site in the future. So he asked for that. And in addition, thinking through at least his wellness center business in particular, again, he may want to elaborate, provide some more information. One idea he had was, well, I might want to introduce some partners or some folks who might work kind of independently of me, but under the umbrella of the wellness center. So I guess, for lack of a better phrase, I've been calling them non-resident owners or non-resident partners in the business. So rather than necessarily an employee of the resident who's operating the business, someone who's kind of a partner there. So those are his 3 requests, essentially, and he tried to get as specific as he could. So for the first variance request, how many non-resident employees would you like to have? He suggested, how about 4? And how many home-based businesses beyond 2 would you like? He said, how about I'd like a total of 4 businesses at the site. And how about how many non-resident owner partners would you like? And he said, I'll say 2. So he got pretty specific, which is helpful because it's always helpful to respond to specific things. So that's the universe of variance requests here. It's very robust. We have three variance requests with the application. So one thought about this, as we talked about this with the applicant, and we had a lot of conversations among staff about this over the intervening months, was, I mean, for one example of one of the businesses that he's proposed is a short-term rental at his place. And short-term rentals weren't as much of a thing in the past as they have become over the last several years. I certainly don't think they were as much of an idea when the home occupation rules were being written, and one could see very easily how anyone who maybe had their own home-based business, a single-person consulting operation, or they have a small business and employ 1 person, and they decide they also want to start a short-term rental, and automatically we could have a code problem. So where the variances that you're considering tonight are very specifically for this property. So I want to be clear about that. One of the things that we thought might be a side benefit, at least for the staff, would be just gauging, I guess, curious about your deliberation about the issue to see if at some point in the near future we should be thinking about some kind of a code change or adjustment so that every person who might run into this problem doesn't have to go through the variance process. So we're not proposing a code change tonight, but I guess we're curious maybe if you have some thoughts along the way as part of your deliberation about whether there might be some reasonable adjustments to make. So I'll just say that. Now, the site itself, first of all, kind of the zoomed out view, the subject property is highlighted in yellow. It's kind of in a particular unique location. It's it doesn't show up very well here, but the city boundary runs kind of in this area. The property is in the city, but everything to the south here, this neighborhood is in unincorporated Clackamas County. This is the new Cheragino Farm subdivision site that is in the process of coming into the city, so we have a patchwork of city and county jurisdiction. Obviously, it's right next to Highway 224 and the on-ramp there, and adjacent to Lake Road, which is an arterial, and in this area, this section of Lake Road is maintained by the county. So we have a couple of different interesting regional interests. The ODOT maintains Highway 224, and they've got some interest in the on-ramp, excuse me, and the interchange there. The county is interested in Lake Road because they have to maintain and have authority over it as an arterial street. So at the same time, you can see that the site is not in the midst of a big neighborhood. It's separated from most of the housing in the area by the arterial Lake Road and only has the one neighboring property. So it does have some unique features. I'm taking from the application materials, this is kind of a site plan identifying the different structures on the building. This site annexed into the city in 2009, and it came with all of these things. So we have several different buildings on the site, including a second small home that's currently used as a long-term rental. We have the detached barn, which is used, as I understand it, primarily for the hardwoods business, kind of a large detached garage. What's listed as home number 1 is the primary residence where the wellness center also operates out of. So there's several rooms in that building available for the wellness center. I will point out, too, that, because as we've noted in the staff report and the findings, there are 2 driveways. So there are 2 points of access to the site. There's a kind of one driveway that accesses directly onto Lake Road. And then it's not really improved right-of-way, but this is technically public right-of-way, Lena Avenue, when there's another driveway to that technical right-of-way here. That's, the right-of-way is kind of accessed just by the 2 lots. Here's one street view of the property, kind of looking straight at it. So you're looking right at the Lake Road driveway, and you can see here is kind of what looks like another driveway. It's technically Lena Avenue here. So this is, again, this is home number 1, the primary residence. So what staff identified as some of the key issues that we addressed in the staff report were, we thought it was important to talk about kind of this balance, or trying to identify a little bit the tipping point between a home occupation and when something actually starts to become more of an actual commercial operation. So, you know, in some respects, we were kind of thinking about the idea of like, where would you really need to be getting into maybe a code change, trying to designate the site for more commercial, more purposeful commercial use. And then along those lines, thinking a little bit about trying to identify a right level of activity, especially in light of the specific requests that the applicant's made. What, for this property, its unique features and the specific businesses that he's proposed there, what do we think are the allowable levels of use, or are there some limits that should be set on that? And then also along those lines, for it to function well, are there any improvements that should be made to the site? In particular, we were thinking about providing safe access to and from the site. So on the one hand, I guess, I want to talk about, I guess, a couple of things. Some of the keys that we thought about here were the number, well, a key, and this kind of gets at the third variance request, which is the owner partners being involved. And so I guess one key thing that we thought was, with any home-based business, it's important that the resident be involved and be primarily involved. Now, I can if I had an operation where Commissioner Edge and I are partners, I have the house and a garage, we're building a rocket in the garage, we're co-partners, we both own it. That's a situation where you could say he's not my employee, he's a co-owner, but we're in this together. And that, one could argue, what's the problem with that? And I don't think there is any real problem with that kind of operation. So I think it is important to think about specifics. And with the Wellness Center, we thought it was important to make a qualitative distinction about what we understood the applicant to be proposing. And that is, for him to operate the Wellness Center, he is a chiropractor, a licensed massage therapist, and he has clients, he generates clients. It seems fair enough, if it would help, for him to have people who he can kind of considers on one level are his employees that come in and help him with some aspects of that business. It seems a little bit different for him to allow other people to come and kind of generate their own clients. Now it starts to feel like maybe we are establishing more of kind of a medical office, the kind of thing that it's not a bad business. It's just, again, in the context of a home occupation, by allowing that variance, would we be increasing the capacity of that home-based business to do a lot more than the average home-based business would be able to do? And one of the points that we made in the staff report was thinking about another aspect, which is we weren't so sure that the number of businesses at the end of the day really matters so much, because if a resident is involved in the business, there's only so much you can do. And so maybe getting hung up on whether it should be 2 businesses or 4 businesses or 10 businesses, if Commissioner Hemer can do 10 businesses and it's all his, like, why, it seemed a little bit silly, as long as it's still performing mostly as a residence, to set that kind of limit. So the quality or the nature of some of that relationship we thought was important. And by allowing multiple businesses, because if we step back and think a little bit about, even though these home occupation standards were established before, I think, the internet exploded as much as it had, before home delivery systems like Amazon and UPS were kind of as crazy as they were, before the short-term rental idea, I think one concept of some of these limitations is the code is kind of assuming that if you have more than one business, maybe the level of activity is going to start to be enough that it stops seeming as much like a home. And I think we think there's some valid reasons to allow multiple businesses and to allow some non-resident employees, but the spirit of the code is trying to acknowledge that you're maybe heading in a direction where, in terms of, since it is kind of a performance-based thing, you might start getting more complaints or calls about it. But thinking about what kinds of trips are generated, what is the nature of the activities, we thought were important considerations here. Let's see. I think that in the case of this site, it's fair, and there is a tightrope to walk here, because the site is unique in a lot of ways. It's a large site. As I mentioned before, it doesn't have a lot of adjacent neighbors. It already has a lot of outbuildings, and kind of itself has a capacity for more activity than the code restriction seems to allow. So we certainly felt it was that the requests were reasonable. That said, one thing I'll point out, or I guess a thing that we thought about a little bit, is there's some pro and con of one of the things that the applicant mentions, and that is that in terms of, acknowledging that there are these different uses, and there was a provision of a table that kind of tried to provide the applicant's estimate of what kinds of trips you might expect to be generated by each of the different businesses, and as well, like what kind of parking might be needed. And so on the pro side, the site is large and does have a lot of room for parking, whether it's non-resident employees or clients or visitors to the site. On the con side, that's a lot of parking on the site. And so we were thinking about that as we thought about the staff report and the recommendations and the conditions that we came up with, was where's the right balance of, on the one hand, the site can support more activity because it has space to accommodate, and even a lot of it out of sight. There's parking areas in garages and kind of behind a fence and whatnot. So that was something we were thinking about. We were also thinking about, one of the recommendations from the county was to try to improve the sight distance at the intersection. And that would involve probably removing, or at least severely pruning, for example, the hedge that's here, so that there is better sight distance, especially for folks coming out of Lena Avenue. And one of the trade-offs there is, if you remove the shrubs, you can see more of not just the house, but you can see more of the parking area. And I guess that was one of the things I was going to point out. From the aerial view, you can see that a lot of the area in front of the house is part of the circulation for the whole site. There are several parking spaces and the additional driveway from Lena Avenue. So that was one of the reasons why we got as specific as we did, I think, with one of our recommended conditions of approval. But with all that said, I guess I'd just have up here for a reminder, the applicant was tasked with, addressing these different criteria for each of the 3 variances, and they're the standard ones that you see for discretionary relief. One, providing some kind of analysis of the benefits and the impacts from this. And the applicant presented that, I think, well in the application. And then really, I guess the key is the second one, which is talking about how reasonable and appropriate each request is, and looking at showing that it does at least one of those things about minimizing minimizing impacts or having some benefit or responding to the site or the environment in some kind of creative way. And then the third piece is, depending on the decision, I guess, about the variances, is there something that could be done to mitigate impacts from it? And so with that frame in mind, our recommendation was to approve 2 of the variances and deny the third one. So we thought it was very reasonable to approve the variance to allow non-resident employees and to have more than just one business. Also to allow more than 2 businesses. We thought that was very approvable. We did think that allowing non-resident, what I'm trying to characterize as non-resident owner partners to participate as part of the Wellness Center was straying too far from the spirit of the home occupation rules, and so our recommendation was to deny that. And specifically the conditions that we proposed were, again, responding to the applicant's helpful suggestions of specifics. We said, how about instead of 4 non-resident employees, we think 2 would be appropriate. And with respect to the 4 proposed businesses, yes, those all seem to be allowable, just being very, very specific about those particular businesses, because just thinking about the nature of them, 2 of them are kind of medical-related, consult kinds of things. The short-term rental, I don't think we had a lot of heartburn about, assuming there might be kind of a weekend-limited kind of thing, and the hardwood business also seemed to be very low impact. So, but just to be clear, being pretty specific about allowing those 4 things. Probably one of our big condition was taking up what the county had suggested in a comment and what our city engineer felt pretty strongly about, and that was, were the applicant not requesting any variances? And I suppose if the applicant didn't have any non-resident employees and had simply applied for a second business registration for Milwaukee Hardwoods, we wouldn't be asking for anything with respect to the Lake Road driveway. But even if it's not necessarily a huge impact, we felt that the variance requests do allow for some increased use of the site and by the applicant's own admission, some additional trips. And just as a basic principle, I guess, of engineering, I think it's in the county's code and it's also in our code, that especially if there's an alternative to direct individual access onto an arterial, as in this case where there is a driveway onto Lena, it's really important to try to limit access and potential vehicle conflicts on arterials. And the applicant obviously has a decade of experience living at the site, and in the communication with me has indicated he's never really observed problems with it. We are also moving to a little bit higher potential intensity being allowed at the site. There is just the very beginning of that right turn lane that leads into the interchange ramp, and that driveway is so close to the Lena Avenue intersection. So we felt pretty strongly about recommending that driveway be closed as a way to mitigate impacts. And then the final condition relates to a county requirement that the site distance be improved at the intersection, and it relates to what I mentioned earlier, which is when you do improve site distance, it does expose more of that front parking area, which is non-conforming to certain aspects of our code in several ways. And while we didn't recommend that the applicant try to recover some on-site landscaping, so changing some of those parking spaces into landscaping, we felt satisfied just improving the site distance. Did think that to get some kind of landscaping back at the corner that would allow still for clear vision there, and especially with a couple of street trees, we thought would help soften a little bit the revelation, I guess, of the area by adjusting the landscaping. So those were our recommended conditions of approval. And kind of as usual, I think you have the standard suite of options, working with the conditions and findings that we recommended. If through your deliberations you want to make some changes, we'll try to catch those and get those into the record. If you feel like you need more time, the applicant has waived the clock. I mean, I think we'd all like to try to get to a decision, but you do have, to some degree, that luxury of additional time if you feel like you need to get additional information, or if you want to, deny the application and go in a different direction than what we have, we'll need to rework things. So with all that in mind, I'll ask if you have any questions right now.
Thank you, Brett. Any questions for Brett?
I have some.
Go for it.
So what I want to do is I want to get a grasp on this, and one of the things that I think of a home occupation business is an adult foster home. How many employees is an adult foster home allowed to have?
Well, so What's interesting is the code doesn't set a limit on the number of non-resident employees. So if we're talking about a single business, a single home-based business, there is no limit on the number of employees. There's no strict limit. There's a discretionary performance-based limit. So I don't know what it would be. For a particular site, depending on its location and how things are situated on the site, I don't know what to say about how many employees might be okay. In some situations, more than one might be difficult because there might start to be parking issues on a street. On another area, maybe 4, 5, 6 non-resident employees would be okay. So that's the tricky thing about the home occupation standards is that, for better or worse, they allow a lot of flexibility. They give the city some discretion, I guess, and put us in the place sometimes of, I think we're probably going to mostly be, like I said, responding to complaints. So I guess it would depend on the location and the nature of the operation, I suppose.
And can I clarify, actually, because isn't an adult foster home a facility that's like licensed and, has some oversight into it? I mean, I'm not sure that it's
a home
this.
occupation.
I don't think it's a home.
Well, I just try to think of something that's in a neighborhood that's
What
very
about like a
employee
daycare?
intensive.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's some state oversight, I guess. I guess I'm thinking about a situation.
I'm just talking about how many employees. I was just trying to use that as an example of if there is a limitation on non-resident employees.
No, there's not a strict
in which we're
one
trying to put a restriction on.
For this particular site.
Yeah. And so then my next question is did you have a discussion with the applicant of why not making this a CG or a neighborhood hub or something like that?
Sure, yeah, the applicant, and I'm sure the applicant can tell you more about his experience and conversations about that. I think, as I understand it, that was an initial hope of his, is that he would annex into the city and try to do some kind of a zone change to get a more commercial designation for the site because of the ideas he had about it. And again, he can tell you more about his experience with it. I think the county and ODOT, I think, were both involved in those conversations. And if you can imagine, so doing a formal zone change to commercial would require, a much higher level of scrutiny about certain issues, especially transportation impacts. And with the interchange right there, my understanding or impression is that probably the message to the applicant wasn't, you can't do that. It was, if you're going to do that, you're going to need to probably improve the intersection, the interchange, the signal, that kind of thing, and at some point, it's just not worth it, because even though an applicant might come with a specific idea about, I'm going to do these 3 or 4 things on the site, once the zoning changes to a more general kind of commercial or, neighborhood hub or whatever, the suite of uses that are allowed there in the future may not be the ones that are proposed right now. And so that's part of, I guess, the idea with when you do the zone change, you do have to kind of account for the potential trips that could happen with other allowed uses on the site. So I think that idea was explored. The applicant certainly has some interest in that, and depending on what happens with the comprehensive plan and required improvements for Lake Road as an arterial and the interchange there. I mean, or with whatever happens in the future with development in the city, that maybe it might end up being a site that could work with some other improvements. I don't know. Those with more transportation experience might have some ideas about that.
I just have one more question. So there was a court case in 1968 where after the county was shown by the applicant, hey, this access that I have on Lake Road is supposed to be here. The county said, okay, well, we'll back off on that. Why is the city still recommending this if it's a county road?
I'll start this and may let Justin finish and either clean up or correct me. But I think my impression from my communication with the county is that they did not explore very deeply with their legal team the ramifications or the real details of that case. I mean, Justin and I talked about this, and he looked at it and felt that the court case dealt primarily with the owners at the time being able to retain their driveway in that place, which seems perfectly reasonable. And I guess what I tried to explain to the applicant and gently tried to check a little bit with the county, I guess, was in a case where someone's proposing, it's not a zone change, but basically proposing some intensity increase for the site. it seems fair to reevaluate that and not to have that court decision, which we understand the context to be talking about not making them close the driveway at that time when they weren't doing anything else except keeping their house there. That's, I think, why we feel a little differently about it. And I didn't push, I asked the county, I didn't push them that hard. They seemed like they were, our policy is just when we see a court case, we're not going to push more on it. And it's not their land use application. And so to be fair, they weren't being asked to give land use approval for this. They were being asked for comments about what they understood to be the proposed development there.
Okay.
Any other questions for Brett?
I don't think so.
No. Thank you. All right. So, comments from the applicant or their representative.
Hello?
Hello.
David Mealy. And let me first say, I am so relieved that all those people aren't here for this.
Right.
Whew. So I'm glad the picture's up there. A little bit of background I want to give the commission. I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. But the two issues I think that are really germane to your decision are safety and capacity. Those words came up in Brett's presentation. And I appreciate all the work that Brett did. But I strongly disagree with some of his conclusions and hope that I can convince you of my reasoning. Wow, I'm a little emotional here. It's been a long process. So I started here, like Brett said, in 2008, 2009. Saw the site, fell in love with it, thought this would make a great clinic, we could live here, we could do what we want. Was encouraged by the county, well, actually by the city, and when Brett mentioned annexation, that was something I did voluntarily. I'm surrounded by unincorporated Clackamas County and chose to do that. And at the time, the city was going through a whole rewrite of their residential code. And Katie Mengel was then head of the planning department, and Lee Allywood was the point person, and that was a long process. Only to sit in a room at the Milwaukee Planning Department with 15, 20 people, a traffic engineer that I had paid thousands of dollars to, a planner that I had paid thousands of dollars to have the county say in about 3 minutes, this is never going to happen. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Dolan's Law. I've learned more about zoning and issues like that than I ever thought I would ever know in my life. But so that was 9 years ago. I want to give a little background to the commission. I guess I might be busting myself here, but I've been doing things on this site, like I had a yoga studio for about 8 of those 9 years, where I had classes of 15 people. And it was never an issue. Those people were subcontractors, so I guess in retrospect, I was in violation of the code without knowing it. But in terms of capacity, I think what I'm asking for now is in measures, it's actually lighter use than I have used this site in the last 8 to 9 years. So Brett, I mean, one of the recommendations is that a result of my request for employees, I started with 4. He landed on 2, and part of, I think Brett might correct me on this, but that we had a long discussion about how much of the space was being used and how many rooms were being used, and it was a difficult formula to come up with, but they decided on 2. One of the things that I didn't talk to Brett about, and based on, yes, 2 would make sense within the clinic, but what if I decide to hire somebody to work with me on Milwaukee hardwoods? So I would need, then I'd be essentially limited because I can only have 2 as per the decision, if that's the decision that's made. And just as an aside, if you look up 5129 is my neighbor, my only proximate neighbor. And Irene Bowman passed away. I don't know if any of you knew her, but she passed, 99 years old, passed away. And I'm in negotiation to buy that, partly because it gives me ownership of that entire island. So part of what happened in that meeting with the county and the state and the city was one of the first things they said to me was, you're going to have to convince your neighbor, Irene, to give up 10 feet of her front yard because if you want to change the zone here, it's not on this picture, but 51st is a little bit to the right. It doesn't align, and for some reason that's the way they designed it way back when. And so this gives me the ability to possibly swing that over and meet that requirement and to mitigate some of the impacts of safety issues and things like that. What else to say about this? Of course, I'm in agreement with some of Brett's conclusions that, yes, I think gratefully I'll be allowed to have employees. It doesn't make any sense to me. I think that I would recommend that the commission or the city council look at that code because it doesn't make, you're essentially penalized if you have a second home occupation. As an aside too, I was reading through the county code because I'm thinking about buying this property and I then would have a piece of property adjacent that's unincorporated Clackamas County and annexed to the city. I'm the city of Milwaukee. And the county has an interesting home occupation. They must have updated in the last 9-10 years where you can have up to 5 employees in a level 2 or 3 home occupation. So it might be, I don't know if my particular site fits the criteria for that, but it's interesting to me that they have now allowed, they've seen that it's a good idea to allow additional employees if the criteria are met. I just want to emphasize that I've been there for 9 years. I've used it in ways that I come to find out in hindsight were at the edge of the code, and there has been capacity. The capacity was ample, and the safety was adequate. Not just adequate, it was fine. So by taking out the driveway, yes, there's the lawsuit and the question of whether or not it applies to the current situation. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't answer that question. But I would say that as the resident there, it actually provides some benefit, including, the neighbor to my east. She has a daughter that gets picked up every day by a school bus. They make a U-turn. Instead of having to back up and turn around, only they were able to, just as like the postman. One of the benefits of having that second ingress, egress, that entry and exit way, is it doesn't back up traffic onto Lake Road. So if somebody's coming off Alena, they have the option of exit or vice versa, if somebody. So it gives them some more options. It actually provides more safety. Of course, the sight distance issue that needs to be addressed and will be addressed, whether that's removing the hedge, which I would prefer not to, but and replacing with some trees. That's a moot point. That needs to be done. So I'm hoping to retain the driveway. I'm hoping that we could find some happy medium with the amount of employees. The third variance request that was denied, I want to paint a different picture for at least you to consider. And in the past, I have actually had an associate that worked with me and for me. As you know, I'm not a spring chicken anymore. As I transition into semi-retirement, it would be nice to have somebody that could take over my practice while I'm still working on a part-time basis, and not be in violation of city code. So that's part of the motivation for the third request, which I wouldn't be able to do under the current recommendations. So. That's about all that's my spiel. Any questions?
Yeah, any questions?
So as you were mentioning, the third variance request that it was recommended for denial by staff, the intent there is to not increase the intensity of the business, but to transition from it being you to it being someone else.
On a part-time basis.
But
yeah.
I mean, I'm hearing that correctly.
Right,
it's not a matter of you're trying to grow the business and give someone else the opportunity to use the space. It's about handing over your practice, transitioning your practice into someone else so that you can retire.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
That's part of my motivation, but definitely an important part of it, yes.
So if there were constraints that you had to maintain the same level of intensity if you brought on an additional partner and not allow them to grow and cultivate their own practice that would be completely in addition to yours, would that work for you and for what you're envisioning?
So if there were like agreed upon, this is where Brett and I got into trying to, how do we skin this cat? Is it a matter of how many hours that the place is open? Is it a matter of how many people are on the site at a given time? Is it a matter of how many trips? I don't know if there's an easy answer to that question, but if I understand your question, is my intention to increase the capacity? No, but to maybe transition more into the hobby / more passion project, Milwaukee Hardwoods. Yes, but I also would add that maybe it's not an associate. Maybe it's a massage therapist who can utilize the space. And so she's not a resident, or he or she is not a resident, but they work at the site.
Right, and what I'm looking for is just whether the intent, the vision for the site involves growing the practice to add additional practitioners who then cultivate their own client base that would be in addition to yours, even as you're downsizing your own work, or are you intending to transition your existing client base and existing practice into the hands of another person? And
more the latter than the former. I can't answer to what somebody else's motivation might be to start a practice.
Well, sure, but I mean, if your permit was conditioned on, basically setting limits, and so that even if you were doing something part-time and someone else was filling in the rest of the time, that the same limits are maintained throughout, would that work for your vision?
I suppose it just depends. The question is, what would those limits be? And I'm
right. That's what we're trying to look at, and what staff has recommended is, I think the number of employees that are on site at any given time being the constraint, so that effectively limits how many people can show up and be.
Right.
And so, which takes me to my next question, which is that the staff recommendation was a limit of 2 employees at a given time.
Yeah, that was after talking to Brett, I had to think through that. Was that a limit of employees that I could hire, or
on site at a given time?
Right.
Yeah, and so is that still a problem for you if you could have 4, 5, 6, 10 employees, but you can only have 2 on site at a time?
No.
That's okay.
That would be workable, but I wasn't, when I read the city's recommendations, it alludes to that later, but it doesn't specify that.
We could clarify that condition when we, when we get to that point. But if that's, I'm just trying to gauge if 2 employees at a time is sufficient.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Other questions for the applicant?
Well, let me follow up on Commissioner Edge's comments about, I think what you're alluding to, and correct me if I'm wrong, is sort of like maintaining the status quo. In other words, a zero-sum game. And while that's, I'm always looking for an elegant solution, which I think that is, but I'm not sure that, that's enforceable. I don't know the answer. Does the city have any comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's like David said. I mean, I think the trick is trying to identify a workable metric that that there would be some way for accountability if there was a question about it. And yeah, I think that's
So would it be fair to say that that's problematic in execution?
Well, I don't know that it's impossible to figure out. I mean, David alluded to several of the types of vectors we talked about, or metrics, I guess, maybe about maybe this or maybe that or maybe the other thing. So I think we'd have to think that through a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
More.
Status quo is probably, I use that a lot in my application. Essentially, what I'm asking for here is status quo.
Understood. Thank you.
Any additional questions for the applicant? No? All right. Thank you very much. So I don't have any testimony, I don't think. Okay. So we will move on. Let's see. So I don't have, any questions at this point? Are we ready to move into deliberation? Okay.
Oh, I feel like I had a staff question, but, oh, no, it was it was employees at a time. I was a little, I didn't see that. Okay, we're good. I'm good.
Okay. All right. So.
Just the number. Brett, clarify that. What's the city's intention there? It's on site at a time, or was it limited to employees?
Can you repeat that?
Sure. So the recommended condition is condition 1. It's.
Can you repeat the question,
Oh,
Brett?
sorry. Repeat the question. Sorry. Thanks, Carl. Question is, can staff clarify what the recommended condition was related to the number of non-resident employees that would be allowed? So condition 1 addresses that, and I'll just read it. No more than 2 non-resident employees associated with any of the approved home occupations shall be present on the site at any given time. So the idea was he can have 10, 15 employees. The important thing was how many are there at one time, because that's what generates some of the impact and helps increase capacity, I guess, or intensity of use of the site.
And that's 2 no matter how many businesses are on site, it's just 2.
That was a suggestion, yeah. Yeah.
Ask for 3. Back here.
Okay, but we can't have you, sorry, we can't have you talking in a microphone. I've already gotten in enough trouble tonight with trying to manage that. So do you have additional comments that you'd like to make? Okay. You can allow that.
I would ask for a minimum of 3 at any given time.
Can I ask F one question? There is currently no rule at all, I just want to clarify, no rule at all about how many employees you can have working at your home business, right?
There is not a limit on the number of non-resident employees associated with the home occupation. The number of non-resident employees is listed as a performance factor, though. When it says here are things that will be evaluated, the code does say number of non-resident employees.
So we'd be better off variancing 100 at the site at one time versus saying just eliminate that, because then you might be triggering a performance issue. We're better off having a variance of 100 employees at the site at a time than we are saying no variance at all.
We need a limit. We need a maximum. We need to specify a maximum.
Okay, all right. You understand what I mean?
No, not exactly. Do you mean, are you thinking about in general for this code provision, or do you mean for this site?
For this particular application, we could say, if we deliberate and we say, we don't care how many employees they have.
Right.
So we could just scratch off number 1.
Well, I think...
But it's tied to a job, or it's tied to a performance ratio, which has home occupancy. So we're better off giving it a limit in this variance.
Well, I mean, so the variance, a variance is needed from the limitation that says if you have 2, or in this case more, since there's been another request for even more, if you have more than 1 business, you can't have any non-resident employees.
Okay.
So a variance is needed to that, but you don't have to put a limit. Your approval could say, doesn't matter. So
all right,
to get it,
got it.
right.
Got it. All right,
We
thank you.
suggested putting a limit.
That's what I was making sure that.
We suggested putting a limit just to help give some, so we avoid performance issues.
I thought that a variance had to be for the minimum required modification to the standard.
Yeah, that's not, you may be thinking of, I'm thinking about like the natural resource rules that talk about impact and showing that you're having the minimum disturbance, you're disturbing like the minimum amount of water quality resource area or habitat conservation area. It's, yeah, that minimum, the minimum variance necessary is not in this current language. Unless I've mispulled it from the code.
Well, your impact is traffic.
You have to avoid or minimize impacts, I guess. That is the one criterion here. We thought that traffic or trips was was probably the most significant impact.
Okay, we'll strike that. We do not need to specify a maximum because it does not say, it's economic hardship criteria.
Okay.
We're not using that, so that doesn't apply. So we technically do not need to specify a maximum. We can just vary from the standard, which is 0.
Right, so we could leave it as a performance metric,
Yes.
which is open-ended,
Which would be trips or
some kind of somebody else, adjacent neighbor reporting or something like that that would bring attention to the issue and draw it to the cities.
Right.
Well, that's what will happen with most home-based businesses, I think, is either someone will, try to do the right thing and register maybe a third business at their home, but they didn't realize that they could only do 2 at their home, and we'll catch that, or there'll be a complaint. I mean, that's how it would happen more often than not.
And you're suggesting that we avoid complaints as an avenue for restricting additional trips or, things that concern that might happen later?
I mean, you can still have complaints with any business, and I think even approving this with the limits that are set, I suppose there could still, someone could still contact us and say, boy, it seems like a lot of people are coming in and out of that site. And we might look into it and find that all the limits are being met, or might, I don't know how we'd handle that with, if we found that, let's say you set a limit of 3 non-resident employees, and we got a complaint, we found out that he has only 3 on site at any one time, and depending on the nature of the complaint, I don't know if we might say, well, it seems like something is not working here, we need to look at this again, or if we'd say, that would seem to be the main issue, and he's staying within the approved limit, so I'm sorry, complainer, this is, nothing we can do about it. I think we just have to assess what the problem is. So all that to say, we'd still respond to a complaint, just the result of it. He's in a little better position, I think, not that you have to set a limit, but if you have set a limit and he can demonstrate that he's under that limit, that gives him some
There's no question.
assurance that he should be okay when he's hiring people, I guess.
Okay. Any additional questions for staff? It seems like we're ready to move into deliberation. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead. The public testimony portion of this hearing on file VR-2019-004 is now closed. No further testimony can be taken unless the public hearing is reopened. Is the commission ready for discussion?
Yes.
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 Yes. Who would like to begin?
I'll open up here.
Thank you.
So this property is unique in that, in fact, if it wasn't for all of the restrictions that would be put on by ODOT and the county, it could be easily converted into commercial property without any complaints. And so I don't see any problem with allowing number 3 to happen, not denying it, but allow another occupant. He could even call it a short-term rental if he wanted to, and somebody was using that short term as to see a patient. And I would say that in number 1, that, if you want to set a limit of 10. I mean, he's got plenty of parking. He's got plenty of people. He's not really going to expand out his business. I mean, if we want to make it 3 to make it happy or make it 4, I mean, the issue is not parking. The issue is not really traffic on this because you're not impacting anybody in the residential. You're on a main artillery. I would say remove the hedges. I'd keep the Lake Drive thing open too. I mean, there hasn't been an accident there yet. There probably won't be an accident there in the future. Now, it does make a difference, though. If he were to own the Lena Avenue house, I would say, you know what, you close down the Lake Road access because now you're not inconveniencing that other neighbor, that he owns that other property. And then it makes more sense to use what Lena Avenue is somebody's driveway as an access point. That's my take on it.
So, accessory and incidental. The reason you don't just say 10 is because a home occupation must be accessory and incidental to the residential use on the site. The word prohibited is found in, and this is what I keep getting hung up on, is the word prohibited is found in the paragraph for 19.507. And so, what we have there is, again, under 19.507 home occupation standards, home occupation shall be allowed as an accessory use, subject to the following restrictions. Home occupation businesses which are not clearly accessory and incidental to the residential use are prohibited. And variances, 19.911.2.b.1. A variance may not be requested for the following purposes: to eliminate restrictions on uses or development that contain the word prohibited. And so I keep getting hung up on this when I look over this. And so, I'm willing to entertain different, some discussion here, but I want to throw that out there, and I think that we need to consider what that means and, what is accessory and incidental to a residential use, and whether it's really in the spirit of the variance applicability standard to apply to that overarching, that umbrella term that's in the introductory paragraph to the home occupation standards.
And you're referencing this as of the number 3, right? Deny the variance requested for.
No. This is
the whole thing.
This is a sum. This is the sum of all parts. So this, it could absolutely be argued that, so an accessory use is something that is so customary that it is not a surprise that it's found there, like a tool shed in somebody's backyard, like a wood shop in somebody's garage, like a barn on a farm. It's going to happen. People are going to do it. It's so customary. So that's an accessory use. That's an accessory and an incidental use. Now, the home occupation standards really do apply as accessory and incidental in terms of, if someone's running a home-based business, they can totally live there and conduct the business, and it's subordinate to the residential use, and you might not ever know that anything was happening in there other than someone living there, and you could even take in customers, and it's incidental in terms of of residential use because, hey, people might have guests, people might have visitors. You don't know when one person shows up in a car and hangs out there for 45 minutes to 4 hours, whatever, whether they're an employee or a customer or co-operator, of a business or whatever. You don't necessarily know, that that's any different. When you have 10 cars that show up all at the same time and are there all at the same time, that doesn't feel subordinate to the residential use. That doesn't feel incidental. And so that's why I really want to think in this context. And so, first of all, is this instruction, around the word prohibited, critical enough that we need to really, it's the intent of the ordinance is to not allow home occupations that are not accessory and incidental. The variance says don't apply a variance to something that's prohibited. So, I want us to think, how important is that in this context, given that the site is unique, given that the impacts to neighbors are few, and given that this is a status quo for the last decade, use, and so I want to kind of move on from that, and just consider it on the merits of the status quo. But I keep coming back to this, you shall not, these are strong, intentional words in the ordinance around this. And so that's why I wanted to bring it up and make sure that we're all thinking about this, because we may have varying degrees of attachment to that as we think as individuals, around, as we're going through this. And so anyway, I think that on the merits, I'm not, I think that as, conditioned by staff, and even with approving the third variance, assuming that, as he said, the intent is not to grow more business, to grow another practice. The intent is to hand off a practice and transition the practice into someone else's hands. That's status quo. That's no big deal to me, but prohibited. And so we need to look at the sum total of things and think about, geez, with a short-term rental and with, 2 occupational, therapy type businesses, and with the woodworking shop, with all of that happening at the same time, and with people coming, is this clearly accessory and incidental to a residential use? So I'm going to leave there for right now, and I may have more to say, but
Yeah.
No, that's
I've
pretty
been
good.
wrestling with this a lot.
Big ticket comments there.
And put another way, it's as if to say Dr. Mealy's status quo would satisfy that it's accessory and incidental residential use, and has been. Is that what would establish if we were accepting the variances?
No, I don't.
That's not what he's saying. He's saying
The other way, that we can't do that.
He's saying that his status quo actually is prohibited, and we can't make a variance on
I
prohibited
get it.
items.
It's actually a different way to, it's an elimination aspect of considering accessory and incidental, because it should de facto be prohibited.
Yeah, I mean, and each one individually makes sense to, it's okay. It fits within the bounds of accessory and incidental. And I guess what I keep coming back to is, that the intensity of this is driven off of the number of trips. And, that's what anyone's going to feel. That's what's going to make it feel like it's not accessory and incidental, is that the number of trips of cars coming to and from the house outweighs a residential use.
Okay.
And so it is a sum. It is not an individual.
If time and money were no object, should this site be rezoned?
I believe so. But I understand the challenges with that, and that really is my preferred solution here, is to rezone the site. But again, the wrestling with, my position on this, I think that rezoning is appropriate, but in the absence of rezoning, you're talking about the status quo.
Right.
And, the rezoning takes on a whole lot of additional investment.
Which would include triggers to what ODOT would say you'd have to do.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in a
Which
TIS
would seem pretty difficult to countenance, because they're rezoning a commercial use for this type of intensity, what the ODOT standards would require.
So it's unreasonable, right? It's
seems to me unreasonable and onerous, and I work for ODOT.
So therefore, we're trying to make the best situation of what is otherwise unreasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah, which has already been maybe overextended. The amount of time and effort this has taken.
So, Brett, asked us at the beginning if we, one of the things as through deliberation would be to think about the code itself, right? And so I'm intrigued with the reference to the different levels of home occupation that apparently Clackamas County has in place. I think like level 1 through 4 or something. And I just wonder if, because of the size of this property, because of its uniqueness, as Commissioner Hemer, referred to, and the, lack of neighbors and, that would be impacted and so forth. I just think that probably the idea of like the levels of intensity and levels of types of use and so forth would be interesting to consider for this code at some point. I don't know when and how that, takes place, but I'm curious because, our society is changing, evolving, the way we work and how we work and all of that is changing, right? So it does seem to be a bit dated in its approach, our code, our current code. So I would be intrigued with thinking about, home occupations in a different way, but I don't know what that means in terms of timing. And I mean, the clock is open, it sounds like, but obviously we don't want to write new code to meet a particular circumstance. But I do think that the idea that you can have kind of these different levels of use and intensity makes a lot of sense to me in modernizing like how we think about it in general.
Can I clarify what the point of those levels are? So like level 1 home occupation is very incidental. It's a type 1 review, staff level, put a stamp on it, they're done. It's very small. A type 2 is an urban area. So like it measures the lots surrounding within, like a quarter mile or something, and they all, if they're all below, a half an acre, or the majority of them are below a half an acre, then you qualify for a level 2 home occupation. If they're more than a half an acre or more 2.5 acres or whatever it is, mostly in a rural area, then you can do the level 3. And the level 3 is very intense, can have lots of employees, can, it could be a little more like a farm, like a working farm. But in the urban area is very small. And the way that Clackamas County constrains the scale or the scope of an operation for a home occupation is by limiting the home occupations to 520 square feet inside of a structure. And so as much business as you can get done in 520 square feet,
I see,
is how many home occupations that you can have. And so number of employees, 5, whatever, who cares, but they all have to park on site. They can't park in the street, and so there's different, it may not be, the limits may not be felt in the same or defined in the same way that the city code is, but they're, I would argue, more constrictive in the county than they are in the city.
Wouldn't you say that is even out of sync with current trend of society? I mean, even those levels seem pretty dated in terms of what someone would want to do with their unurbanized property and the number of different occupations they might want to have.
I don't know. We don't see a whole lot of them.
Yeah,
I'm just saying.
You're a sheep farmer, or you're a dairy farmer,
in Oak Grove, and that, or we get occasional home occupation applications, but we don't get a whole lot, and they're usually Airbnbs because short-term rentals aren't permitted.
I just think you might see a lot more of them in the future. People tending to work from home, taking on second occupations, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's going to be more likely that you see them. And it won't be based on how many acres or...
I know, yeah. I know.
We're not sheep farmers or... No.
So, and so that's where I was kind of, I wanted to see a trips table, projected trips table, and when you're considering that people aren't commuting from this site out to, work. They're doing their work on site, then you're offsetting some of those inbound, trips from that originate somewhere else, come to the house and then leave. And so I feel like you could still work, we could talk this through. I feel like you could maybe still work our way down to where something does qualify as accessory and incidental. But, without the data on the trip generation rates, it's kind of hard to, you need to find some way to say, this is clearly accessory and incidental to the residential use, if that's the hang up, and I think that I generally like to, encourage us to follow the code, because, if someone appeals it to LUBA or, city council, it could, our decision could be overturned, through no fault of the applicant, and we're just trying to do the right thing, but we go against code, and, and I'm not saying anyone's going to come in and appeal this. Obviously, there's, no one here challenging, with testimony, but just as a general rule, I think we should try to mind the code. So anyway, I feel like we should have some kind of metric where we say, this is how you keep it clearly accessory and incidental, and that may just be the number of employees, and that may be fine at 3, like he requested. No more than 3. We're not just saying, 3 employees and customers. We're just saying 3 employees. So there could still be more customers. There could still be more activity. There could still be guests and visitors and short-term rental and everything. But, so maybe 3 is the way, 3 employees or 2, whatever we're comfortable with, is the way that you satisfy the clearly accessory and incidental, because that keeps it from growing beyond the bounds of what a house would be doing.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So we agree then, like we're just putting it out there. So if we say that, 3 is acceptable, and then he buys the parcel that's adjacent, and then up to however, can he then have 2 more businesses on that individual site? And so now we're at 5?
Yeah, it's a separate site.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Unless he was to bring them together as one development, then it's a completely separate home occupation.
Which would work against his logic, because then he would only have the ability to have the 3, whatever we decide, or what.
Oh, so since that other house is in the county,
yeah,
then he could do a level 2 home occupation, which would be 520 square feet, walled off in the structure for business uses.
Okay.
But then that would be up to 5 employees or whatever the county will.
Or he could annex it into the city and have 1 home occupation until the rules change. Or he could go for another variance.
Or 2 if there was no employees.
But, that's not part of this
you're only-
application,
right.
so I guess I just, I appreciate where you're coming from, but that's not what's in front of us here tonight, so.
But you're only allowed 1 home occupation at 1 dwelling. We are giving
Someone would have
variance to
to, an operator would have to live there.
Yeah.
Right, but so
Whether it's a tenant or owner doesn't matter. The operator has to live.
All right, so are we okay with number 1, and instead of setting the limit of 2, we set it to 3, and then that satisfies your limitability to make it so you don't feel guilty about the prohibit thing and the scale of it?
Prohibited thing?
That's legalese.
That's a simple yes or no question.
Right.
I think so, yes.
All right, good.
I think so, too.
I would agree.
All right. Are we okay with number 2 then? The way that it's written?
So he's asking for 3, and staff is suggesting 2.
No. I'm sorry. I'm at the conclusions.
I'm also at conclusion, so.
And so I'm reading staff recommendation. Number 1, right, we're going to approve setting a limit of 3 non-resident employees, right? And then number 2, which is approve the variance to allow more than 2 home occupations. We're okay with that one?
He requested 3.
He requested 3 non-resident employees.
No, he requested 3 occupations as well. Is that right?
4.
There's 2 additional home occupations.
Nope.
Sorry.
There's 4.
Sorry.
He's requesting up to 4 home occupations.
Yeah.
There's the Milwaukee Wellness Center, the Hardwoods, the occupational therapy, and the short-term rental.
So 2 as written.
So 2 as written.
Okay.
But limited to a total of 4.
It is limited to a total of 4.
Yeah, as it's written.
As it's written.
As written. I got it. Thank you. As it is written. Okay, what do we think about number...
Just to make
Right? And what do we think about number
Two.
3?
Oh, 3?
So to me, I think that, yeah, I think this will be okay as long as, we keep the same condition stands for the number of employees that can be on site at the same time. And so I think that effectively limits the work that can be done.
Okay, so that gets back to your prohibition thing, right?
I think, I mean, yeah.
Okay, and then under B, staff recommendations to follow key conditions.
Yes.
I would say that we eliminate point number 4, which says close the existing Lake Road driveway.
Point 3.
I don't know.
I have a dot, 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 the third bullet. And, but relieve the provide replacement landscaping.
I don't agree with that.
And why not?
I think that, I think the variance process gives us the opportunity to ensure that the right thing happens here.
But I would say that if we're maintaining the status quo and there has never been a complaint or an accident, then why worry about it? It's obviously not a safety issue.
I wouldn't say that.
Right, until it is.
I mean, it's an opportunity to bring it up to some standards, right? I mean, this is an opportunity to do that, so.
Okay. I'd be mad if I lived in that other house. That's when I would start complaining. If I lived in that other house and people were now using my driveway to access his site and that other homeowner using it, I'd be...
It's a public street. It's a public street.
Whatever. It's a dead-end alleyway that's used as a driveway.
I know, but it's a public street, and public streets are for movement of goods and services.
Right. I don't like it. I think it should stay open. You guys can debate it.
I also think that the additional staff notes about the comments that are being made about the signage that were mentioned in here, but were not conditions for approval. They're in like below the 4 bullet points, and additional staff notes following requirements. Not conditions of approval, make the modification that's necessary to provide a required intersection site distance. We talked about that. I would recommend that change. Relocate the existing freestanding sign from the public right-of-way, so there's comments written in here about signage, and register all approved home occupations and existing long-term rental units as business with the city, and I think that should also be condition of approval.
I think those are applicable without being conditioned.
They don't meet the definition of conditions here. They're something, though, we can put on record as recommendation for the staff. Is that right?
Okay, yes, that somehow that be recorded
Is that
as...
how it is?
Yeah.
Brett, are those notes?
Those are just requirements.
To just comply with the current code?
Yes, and they're...
That's what I thought that they were.
Attachment 2, the recommended conditions of approval, they're listed as additional requirements. They're kind of there for the information of...
Okay.
Going to be conferred as requirements to the code.
Got it. Thanks.
All right, where are we at here? So we have Commissioner Hemer, who's not in favor of the driveway.
Yeah, I would like a straw poll from the other commissioners about closing the existing Lake Road driveway.
Are you asking a specific question?
Yeah, a straw poll. You want to close it.
Who's in
right?
favor, who's not in favor?
Right.
Do we have...
I think we have to close it for standard.
No, we don't. Because we're going to make our recommendation. All I want to know is that, because what I would, if I were to make a motion right now, I would get rid of bullet point number 3. I just want to know how many people...
Taking a poll as if we don't
Right. How many people won't vote for it if we get rid of bullet point number 3? Or how many people would like to get rid of bullet point number 3?
I'd like to keep it.
I vote keep.
I'm already on record as a keep.
I'm a keeper.
Okay.
think you're outvoted.
I'm on the fence.
So we've amended condition
I
1.
think it's absolutely ridiculous.
We've amended condition 1 to be no more than 3 non-resident employees. The rest is the same. Number 2 is the same. Number 3 is as written, and number 4 is as written. And then the difference is that we are finding, and how do we have to prepare a finding for to revise the denial of the third condition?
Well, I think I would like to suggest, and maybe Justin can correct me, I guess, that if you give staff direction to, just in general, revise the finding within the variance, I think it's number 9, finding number 9, where the conclusion was that that variance should be denied. If you can maybe just give us some general direction, one, be clear that if you're saying we want to approve that variance, and maybe give some general direction about if there's something you'd like to say. For example, if we look at it, I'm looking at, in the packet, I'm looking at 6.1, page 18. So this is the findings, and it's really the last 2 full paragraphs. And I don't mean like where the ones that don't start with the Planning Commission finds, but the two last big ones above that, starting with however the variance requested to allow non-resident owner partners, that paragraph and the next paragraph are the ones that come up with the finding to deny that variance. So looking at that, if you can give some direction about, we don't have to wordsmith this because I think it would be painstaking, but if you can give some general direction about you basically want to end up concluding that it is reasonable and appropriate, and maybe give me some direction about changing it. I'll come up with something that changes it for approval. But if you have some specific suggestions, I'll take them. Is that acceptable?
Do you want the suggestions in the form of the motion, or just as some guidance, and then we go into the motion?
I think you give guidance and include it in the motion.
Okay.
Before we make the motion, can I ask one question of the commission? If we are going to close off the Lake Road driveway, then do you really need to trim the hedges at Lena and Lake?
Yeah, I think it's the Lena site distance.
Site distance required.
It's the Lena intersection site,
Okay.
site visibility.
All right. It's not the Lake Road driveway that is causing that site distance?
No.
No, it's...
Okay.
Yeah, it's the side street.
If you close the Lake Road driveway,
yeah,
all right, you no longer have a road that is close to that Lena entrance to in and out. So all you have to do is look left and look right. You don't have to worry about that traffic.
But if you stop behind if you stop behind the intersection where you're supposed to stop and wait before you enter into the intersection as part of your turning movement, if you're back there, you're looking at a hedge.
Got it. Okay.
If you pull forward out into the street,
into the
then you can see.
Like the status quo of most of our streets in Milwaukee.
Right, which should be rectified.
So it's you.
No. My wife will tell you every single day when I come off of Stanley Road, I say, look, I'm halfway into the intersection so I can look to my left. It's dangerous.
Okay.
All right. So we need to provide some guidance and suggested language for the condition.
What I was going to suggest is that we, basically our guidance is that we do find it reasonable because it is a means of, because it's still conditioned by the number of employees that may be on the site. And that provides an effective cap for the intensity of activity that can reasonably occur.
Yeah.
It seems acceptable.
Buy-in.
Yeah.
Okay.
You okay with that?
Sorry, can you say that again? I was thinking about another question I might have for you, but can you say that again?
We find that it's reasonable to allow the additional, the third variance because the first condition, the limit on the number of employees that's on site, provides the effective cap on the intensity of activity on the site.
Okay.
And I'll restate that, I guess, when I make my motion.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. I have a question for you that I think we might actually want to get some input from the applicant about, and that is, so if you're saying they're going to be allowed up to 3 non-resident employees on the site at any given time, and you're going to approve the request for up to 2 non-resident owner partners, so different than an employee. So what I was thinking about, I just want to make sure that that's clear. And then one of in condition number 2, where we're specifying the 4 home occupations that would be allowed, there's kind of some specific, the second sentence says, no more than these 4 businesses shall be registered as businesses. I guess a point of information that I think we might need some input from the applicant on is the expectation that these non-resident owner partners, would I maybe be seeing a business registration for them? Like if they're a licensed massage therapist, are they going to need to get a business license with the city? Because if that's the case, and this is your intention, then we have a problem, and we just want to make sure we tweak that number too. Because if I'm looking for 4 business registrations with this address, one's a short-term rental, one's the occupational therapy business, one's for the wellness center, and one's for the hardwoods, and now all of a sudden there's the licensed massage therapist or 2 that pop up. If we don't revise that condition, or you give some guidance, then if that's a need, then we'll have a problem. And we just need to solve it. So can we ask him to just come up and give some information or answer that?
Yeah, I think it's really important that we are clear about the difference or similarity between a non-resident owner partner and an employee. So if you are saying that the cap of 3 on site at any given time includes those non-resident partners or not.
Right.
They're kind of apples and oranges as the staff report is currently written, and so we have to make sure
And doesn't the staff report exclude it and make them separate, so the 3 does not include the partner?
Well,
I thought that was intentional.
The staff report proposed to deny allowing the partners.
Right.
And part to explain, I guess, part of what the thinking of the specificity in condition 2 about no more than 4 businesses shall be registered was the idea that, so if you're allowing non-resident employees, they're employees. They don't have their own business registration. So I just want to clarify with the applicant, if he's saying, I want to bring on a licensed massage therapist to work out of the space.
They would be an employee because we are going to go with number 3.
So my understanding was that, and I've seen these words, scattered throughout the application, is that they would be under the umbrella of the existing business. And so that means that they would be employees. It would be Milwaukee Wellness Center would be the registered business, and that if there were other partners doing, part-time, work or whatever, then yes, they're an employee. It's under, I'm sorry.
That's why I'm asking.
Even if they're a subcontracted
it's not a separate business. It's not a separate business.
Right, because we are going to agree with number 3.
So again, if we're talking about status quo, then the owner-operator comes in, takes the position of the applicant in his practice for that part-time day, and has 3 employees that continue to do the work. And if they share time, then there's still only 3 employees. If there was overlapping, he was doing something part-time and the partner was doing something part-time and they overlapped, there's still only 3 employees max. Yeah. So I feel like, the constraint is the number of employees as well as the number of licensed businesses. If a partner came in as part of the Milwaukee Wellness Center or as part of the occupational health or as part of, whatever, that doesn't matter. It's under the umbrella of these 4 businesses, and that term was used in the application. application a lot.
Right, he could still rent out one of his unused offices to a massage therapist, but that massage therapist would be a subcontractor.
Part of the
right,
Milwaukee Wellness
which would be considered an employee.
Well, so I guess that's why I want to get clear. If that's the case, should the number really be 5? It's 5 non-resident employees, and you keep it with 4 registered businesses, because we're not really going to care about, yeah.
Well,
I wonder, my question for David was, I guess, should we be expecting to see additional business registrations for these different kinds of folks that were coming through the variance that we suggested denying that you're going to approve? It's just an informational question, I guess, because I don't want us to have a problem if it's like, oh, well, of course this licensed massage therapist needs to have a business license. They're coming in, I'm renting them space. They're not an employee of mine. They're running their own practice. Then I want to make space for that in the condition.
Justin, is the applicant able to come up and answer that question?
I mean, if you would like to open the record to allow him to come up and answer that question, I think that's okay.
Okay.
I think it's necessary to kind of understand. I mean, there's indicia. I think being very clear on this point is important for your decision.
Okay. So how do I do that? I need to
Close and reopen, right?
Yeah, just reopen.
Okay, so I have to, the public testimony portion on file VR-2019-004 is reopened.
Come on.
Yeah, just help
Come
us
on
sort
up.
this out. Yeah.
No. Umbrellas, they work under my license,
Okay.
whether it's as a subcontractor or as a direct employee. So-
Okay.
And so in us choosing the number 3,
Well, but I've also heard that it's on site.
yes.
But
So it would be your co-partner, or your subcontractor, and a maximum of 2 other employees.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. But I'm even comfortable with having a limit of 5 employees, but no more than 3 on site. If that's what the commission, if that satisfies the criteria to give it some sort of, I don't. I'm just putting that out there. But 10's a good number too. But
Thank you.
But that's okay.
Okay, Brett, you feeling good? Good.
No.
No, you're not.
I just, I do feel clear if the idea is if the limit on the number of home business registrations that we should see will stay at 4. That sounds clear. So that sounds okay. So to understand, but if you're saying, so approve the 3rd variance, which would allow non-resident owner-operators to be at the site, is there any more clarification related to the 3 non-resident employees that's needed, or do they fold into that, I guess, is kind of what I'm trying to figure out. Do I need to care about the relationship or the
We're denying that request.
Oh, you're sticking with denying the 3rd variance?
Yes.
Oh, I thought we were talking about revising the findings to approve that variance.
We are talking about revising the findings.
Yeah.
We are
Denying staff's recommendation to deny.
Well, he's not agreeing with our recommendation. You're approve or deny that.
You are going
the
to.
staff recommendation.
My understanding.
Okay.
I don't want to confuse.
No. I was confused.
Yeah, no.
Now I understand what the problem is.
Yeah.
So I think the number 3 still works, and if we want to clarify that includes anybody.
Yeah, includes a non-resident business owner or independent practitioner.
No more than 3 non-resident employees or operators associated with any of the approved home occupations shall be present on the site at any given time.
Yes, yeah, there you go.
So all we're doing is adding the words employees or operators.
Yep.
Or I guess or operators is the only words we're adding. Does that sound okay?
Which then ties back to number 3 as defining your non-resident business owner or independent practitioners as operators.
Yeah, so throughout the findings, wherever I've used owner partner, should I change that to operators, you're saying?
Oh, yeah, I guess so.
Or is it just easier just to say,
I think operator is the right term.
okay,
Okay, so to understand the practicality of this then, you're saying 3 is still a good number, and you can apply that to whatever the relationship is, their employees or their operators. But, yeah, you're approving the variance where the request was to have non-resident operators, kind of just as a principle, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, and the number 3 at any one time is workable still, okay.
And those non-resident operators are employees for the purposes of the limitation for 3.
yes.
Well, yeah, I mean, what I was saying is that we could amend that so that it was no more than 3 non-resident employees or operators.
Oh,
Right.
So we don't even have to fold them in. We can just enumerate employees or operators.
Okay.
The number is 3.
Yes.
Okay.
And so that revised finding you were saying that first condition can kind of address, say something about that first condition where the limit on the number of non-resident participants in businesses on the site at any one time effectively makes that third variance approvable because it doesn't present any different impact.
Yeah, it is important to distinguish the employees or operators and know that we're not including clients as part of the 3. So as long as, we know that we're talking about workers and not, so it's not anybody associated with the home occupation, it's employees or operators.
Right. And so if where I've said, for example, the start of that second paragraph, I'm back on page 18, the second of the last 2 substantial ones for that says non-resident employees generate only their own trips. A non-resident, now would be operator, would be responsible for not only their own trips, but also those of their clients. I'll adjust that language to either remove it or make it work with the idea that you're saying essentially there's no difference between an employee and an operator in terms of impacts to the site. And we'll smooth that out to make that work.
I think that is appropriate in this case.
Okay.
Because of the uniqueness of the site and the status quo and everything, that in this case, that is an okay variance.
Okay.
All right.
I'm not doing this one.
I'm ready for a motion.
All right, I'll try
It's
my...
your edge.
Point of order, are we technically?
Oh, are we back in deliberations?
You have
Oh,
Close public
oh, boy, okay.
go to deliberation.
Oh, what did you become such a plan in there, man? Good job.
The public testimony,
I didn't want to interrupt.
the public testimony portion of this hearing on file VR-2019-004 is now closed for reals this time. All right, so we need a motion.
I move that we approve application file number VR-2019-004, including all 3 variance requests with the conditions of approval, with findings amended as discussed previously with staff, and with the conditions of approval amended so that condition number 1 reads no more than 3 non-resident employees or operators associated with any of the approved home occupations shall be present on the site at any given time, and the rest of the conditions as drafted.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Approved.
Thank you.
Okay, moving right along.
Mary's got 10
Mary, we have work session items part 2 at 9:50 PM. Let it be noted.
You know what? Chair Travis, I would like to note that we don't have anything on our schedule for August 27th. And knowing Commissioner Edge's passion for part of this, and I asked staff a question myself about the definition of high, medium, low, and mixed-use density. Maybe we can hold it off to the August 27th meeting and have a short one.
Maybe.
Unless if Mary's on vacation.
There's some time drivers here,
There are
right?
some time drivers.
Yeah.
So my understanding is that Block 3 policies minus the urban design policies are going to get pinned down by the city council on August 20th. So that's a possibility because the conversation that Commissioner Hemer wants to have is in the urban design.
So we can skip urban design or hold that until the 27th, but get through the other.
As far as I know, hopefully Denny doesn't get mad at me for saying that, but yeah, I mean, the CPAC wanted more time on the urban design policies anyway. That's why we're taking them out of the being penned down. So I don't know. Why not? Unless people already made plans not to come on the 27th.
No plans other than to come back and discuss urban design policies.
Oh, yeah. So, but, I mean, let's go ahead and extend to some time right now, because if we get into this and, you know, we're not going to get in 9 minutes to get through.
Yeah.
I recognize that.
So,
I move that we extend to 10:15.
10:15. Yeah. I know you've got a child that needs to be fed, so I'm cool with that if you're cool with that.
We're trying to give us enough room that we don't have to do another motion.
And actually, if any commissioners want to leave at this point in time, quorum is not required.
Yeah. There's no voting necessary. Don't worry.
No, that's fine.
I would even think that, Lauren, you could add comment by email, and we would accept that as
is that right?
Commissioner.
I think so. Well, yeah, as long as it's before the 20th.
Okay.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Thank
I do
you.
have a hungry mouth.
Okay. All right, so I have a motion to extend to 10:15.
I'll second it.
All those in favor? Aye. Okay, Mary.
All right. So, since the last time we've seen you, there's been quite a bit of input that's been provided to the Block 3 policies, which you could probably see in the track changes version. You could probably tell about like 50% is new or changed. So that has been happening because of a few different things. So one, we've had a community open house, which that's not right, actually. I don't know what happened to the slide. Anyway, so we had a community open house in July, which we had about 50 to 60 people there, which is pretty good for a summer public meeting. So we were happy about that, as well as an online survey where we actually received almost 300 responses. And partly because of that high response rate, we did have quite a few I believe the Watershed Council did a really high kind of email out to their members to kind of push it a little bit and respond. So we also probably saw a little bit higher intake of people that don't live in the city limits of Milwaukee taking the survey. So we can't tell if that's a correlation or not, but there's that. We did have 2 focus groups, one with environmental organizations that provided a lot of good comments that we've inputted as well, and a Spanish language focus group. And the most recent, I think, the community engagement summary report for Block 3 kind of goes into detail about those focus groups, what they got from that, some of their main takeaways, as well as same with the online survey and the open house. And then we've also had conversations with the CPAC and City Council. As I said before, the urban design chapter is planning to not be pinned down with the other Block 3 policies on August 20th to keep it open for CPAC to continue discussions on it and potentially Planning Commission.
Will the CPAC consideration of the urban design policies be before or after August 27th?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't remember. When's the next CPAC meeting? I don't remember. I can look it up.
Isn't it the first Tuesday of the month or something?
Because I don't think we've had, no, I don't know if I'll be able to find it. I don't know offhand.
I'll look while you're talking. We'll answer that question.
Okay, good question, though. Okay, so I guess going into some of the more current things that have happened, we did have, we went to City Council last week, or no, 2 weeks ago maybe, and we provided some of their brief comments that they had. One, I think the most discussion was around the daylighting of creeks, mostly to make sure that we add language to ensure that it's for habitat conservation versus just there's a creek here, let's just daylight it kind of thing, which they felt was the intent of the policy anyway, but they wanted it to be more clear. And then there was a couple of other very minor kind of word changes or anything like that. So those were kind of the main points that I had to bring up that wasn't urban design related. Do you want me to continue going and go into urban design, see if we can do it? No. Okay, we'll stop here. And we'll talk about if you have any sort of questions or comments based on the survey, any sort of community engagement, and the city council comments, or if you have any new comments.
So the city council comments about daylighting creeks was not, I thought I saw the words that they wanted to soften the language around that.
I don't think that was the intent, if that's how you read it. No, I think their intent was definitely to make sure that it was more clear.
Okay.
And that this was the reason, basically stating this is the reason why we have this policy.
Okay.
To do this and this and this. And they felt that habitat conservation or habitat rehabilitation or that sort of thing was the correct reason why.
I can't find the next date for the CPAC meeting in my email.
Because I don't think we've had one in August yet, correct?
Right. Yeah, so, sorry about that. I mean, your question is, will CPAC see it before August 27th?
Yeah, what I want to know is if there's concerns from the CPAC about some of the urban design policy language or whatever. If there's some reason, is there something that we need to focus on to help them understand something, or do we need to wait to hear what they do so that we can provide comment on that? So, I mean, it was, as far as the workflow is concerned, is it better for, assuming that it's in September, the first week of September or whatever, or maybe the second, so it's not on Labor Day, but would it be better for us to provide input about that for them to review, or would it be better for us to wait until they've provided input and then we would add comments to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the main concerns for the CPAC is they've run into similar problems that we've had for a lot of it, is there's just a lot to cover here, and the urban design is always at the very end, and we end up being like 15 minutes left at the meeting. We're like, oh, we didn't have enough time. And they felt like the urban design policies were actually quite important. And I think, just the clarification of making the map, which was a really good suggestion, is going to help a lot with their analysis as well.
On the map, since we're talking about this, on the map, did you guys just decide just to only do the downtown and it didn't even seem like they covered the whole city?
Well, it's relied on the criteria.
Right, but the criteria is only a main artery quarter mile away from a park and a commercial shopping zone. So there should be one on the corner of 37th and Railroad. That goes into Hector Campbell, at least.
You mean where the Safeway is?
No. On 37th and Railroad.
Oh, Railroad, sorry.
It should be high density. Why is that not high density?
Well, it's dependent, so...
There's Minthorn.
If there's a red line, that means any property that's touching that red line is eligible.
Right, so Railroad Avenue.
Yep. So
right, at 37th, and you're still within a half mile of a major shopping center. So why isn't that all high
Yeah, but
density?
the criteria means that it has to overlap with all of the criteria, so.
Correct.
shopping center
I gotta
and
assume
yeah,
that
but-
if you were to take a quarter of a mile in one direction from the center of the shopping center, right, and a quarter mile from even the edge of Minthorn Springs, that it's got to get into at least half of 37th up to Monroe, up to Railroad, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, I can reassess and double check before our meeting.
But then one of your questions was, should we consider, right, what is a park, right? Is it open space? Is it a natural area? Does it have to have a playground? I mean, there's a lot of things that kind of, right, that can, and I think that's a really good discussion to have, because if you say that Balfour Park is a developed park when it's just a lawn without a building on it, right? Does that really actually give any public benefit to anybody? You know, I didn't realize that there was there's open space already currently on the Hillside Manor site, which I didn't know that, but that's not even officially a park, but it's certainly developed as a walking path at least.
Okay.
Things to consider.
Things to consider. So are you saying you don't have anything on natural resources?
No, when I read through it, I was very happy.
Okay. Public facilities and services. Those, I just want to make sure that we use this time because it'll be going to city council, and so if there
there's a
are
few suggestions that I
final
put on
comments, I mean, I feel like
incorporated.
staff has really taken feedback into consideration at this stage, but want to just double, triple check with folks.
I feel good, and I'm glad to know that we will take up urban design when we do.
Yeah.
With some fresh
I have very little to contribute tonight.
Oh, okay, so
We're not talking about urban design, so
Right, but
everything
so-
else is pretty solid.
Okay, great. Well, that's good. So I think, and obviously, if we have things to comment on now, I mean, your question about when's the best time to put input into the urban design process, I mean, I think through email, like, you would welcome that as soon as possible, with the idea that we would have space on the 27th to have a collective dialogue about that.
Yeah, and let me check the website really quickly if we have the next CPAC meeting on there.
I texted David, but apparently he's not awake.
I think he's like on the East Coast, so.
Oh, is he? Oh! That's why he's not here. Okay. Okay.
I should know this, but I don't.
Or he may just put his work phone away.
Oh, right. Yeah, people do that. So I have something that I wanted to talk with you guys about, and that is that I feel I'm not able to serve on the CPAC right now due to work-life balance a situation that I'm in related to working and family and so forth. So I was hoping that someone might be interested in volunteering to serve on CPAC, at least through October, when my work will rebalance. And then, I can regain opportunity to interact. I mean, at that point, there's going to be a lot of that, of like the cross-pollination of looking at all the comp plan goals. And so I'd like to re-engage at that time. But in the next few months, I know I'm overloaded, so looking for some help. Wanted to put that out there in case there's some eager volunteers. Or we could try to tag team some of it too as well, and maybe we can also, we don't have to nail this down tonight at this late hour of who's going to participate when, but just for something to think about as a group here.
What nights do they generally meet on?
Mondays.
It's generally been the first Monday of the month.
Yeah.
Or the third Monday when we were doing housing and Block 3 at the same time. But then I think the last one was on a Tuesday.
I know that's why I can't remember it. There's been some flip-flopping and a few changes.
So I don't know when the next one is, but
doesn't look like there's one on the city calendar either.
No.
So maybe it hasn't been scheduled.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you thought you weren't going to need it.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
I'm usually the first one to jump up and request, comp plan assignments, but I don't want to commit to it not knowing when the meeting dates and times are.
My Tuesdays and Thursdays are out for me. I can do Monday and Wednesdays.
Okay. Well, I'll bring it up with David because he doesn't know. I mean, I was not able to attend the last one and then realizing that I can't do it right now. So I can bring it up with him and then we can get a schedule and get that out to you guys. And if it's something that, you can do it this month, you can do it next month or however,
So we're looking for coverage for 2 monthly meetings plus whatever research, reading, what?
Right.
The homework.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
And all you have.
Nail that down.
Yeah, all you have now is urban design and then doing a matrix of how everything all mixes together.
Yeah, the synthesis.
The synthesis piece, yeah. Which is, I think, a really exciting time. I mean, I hope to pick up there at the end of the process. But for urban design and, yeah, getting into the synthesis. So we'll get the dates from David and then, pass that out to you guys.
Yeah, if we can talk about it again in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And we know
Okay.
what the schedule will be, then I'll have a better idea if I can make such a commitment.
Thanks.
So do we move to Block 4 in this year, or does that happen late?
Done?
Wow.
Block 4,
'Cause
I don't think
Denny-
there is a block 4.
Well, synthesis.
Well, synthesis is technically block 4, but it got condensed quite significantly.
Okay.
It was going to be at the same time frame as all the other blocks, but due to the city and city council wanting to get things set and in place, it's now a little bit shorter. Yeah.
Okay. Just trying to,
Yeah, by the end of the year, this is going to be wrapped up.
Yeah, so, it's supposed to be done by the end of the year.
just trying to make that really.
And then it's code changes. So then we have all of that as well.
2 years of code changes afterwards.
Yeah, right. So wrapping up,
Yeah.
not really, but.
Just kicks off all the real work.
You mean,
Yeah, exactly.
you mean implementation?
Right, right. So thank you. We'll get the dates on that. Well, we have a few minutes to spare. Is there anything else, Mary, that you want to share at this time, or you waited all night for us? So
I don't think so.
It's like you
I was
got
gonna
a
say
scoop
I was gonna say you should have them sign up for the comp plan newsletter, but it's okay.
Yeah. Missed opportunities with some folks, I feel like, that
the audience
would have appreciated maybe knowing or being part of our open houses and processes.
Well,
it's not our fault. It's just, it's obvious that some folks would have had more context and understanding of some things that align to why we're doing this at all, And I am not going to be surprised if the next meeting, a bunch of folks come for open comment and get to it on the Hillside and start talking about it again. And that's certainly, that's part of public process, and they have every right to do that. But what I observed is that the Clackamas County Housing Authority made some admittance of some stumbling they did on outreach, and we bore the brunt of some of that. And I hope City Council observed that, because that's what I heard from them.
Yeah. I'd rather not comment on this at this stage, but I think that it's a good sign that we had lots of people show up that want to get engaged. It's a great time.
No, it is.
So
That's a good thing.
But I'm just saying that I just hope City Council watch this recording, because we need to be ahead and anticipate things.
yeah. Well,
This is not to lay blame at their feet. It's just there are consequences when public involvement has missteps.
I just have one comment on public facilities.
There we go.
Yeah. So last time that we talked about this, it was goal 6, number 5, I guess, where we're talking about it says now, require streets be designed and maintained to meet the minimum needs of emergency services providers. And the spirit of that recommendation when we were here and, interacting with Denny about it was not necessarily to just roll over to the fire department saying that they need 12-foot lanes,
Right.
but to work with the partners to make sure that we're providing them what they need without overbuilding our facilities. And I feel like that was lost in the current draft.
Okay.
Part of the problem is that we are overbuilding streets, making them too big, and people
Right.
speed down them because these huge fire trucks need to get down no matter what. And,
Right.
you can do things differently as an urban fire department. That doesn't mean that you need to overbuild all these streets, so.
Okay.
Good point. Okay. Thanks, Mary. Justin, you say, okay. Starting to hear things.
I have an announcement, though.
Okay, do commissioners have any updates?
I do. So I want to let everybody know that there is a styrofoam collection that will be going on at the Farmers Market August 25th from 9:30 to 2 p.m. So go out, tell everybody that you know, pull out your old styrofoam. It is sponsored by Celebrate Milwaukee, Inc. and the Milwaukee Environmental Stewards Group, the ones that brought you Ban the Bag.
Great. Thanks for that update.
Any other updates or? Okay. Great. We've already discussed our forecast for future meetings. We'll be back here in 2 weeks to talk about urban design. Very exciting. And then we've got some hearings on the schedule, so we're busy. I think with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. 10.